Welcome, dear friend, to this sanctuary of stillness. Tonight we journey together into the ancient wisdom of peace, where stories become doorways and breath becomes refuge. There is nowhere you need to go, nothing you need to accomplish. Simply allow yourself to be here, fully, completely as you already are. Let the weight of the day begin to dissolve. Let your body sink into the support beneath you, and let us begin where all journeys truly begin, in this present moment, with this single breath, with one simple story that contains all stories. The Tea Master and the Empty Cup. In the late autumn of 1647, in the mountains west of Kyoto, there stood a modest tea house made of weathered cedar and river stone. Morning mist clung to the valley below, and the first frost had turned the maple leaves to brilliant crimson and gold. Inside this tea house lived Master Rikyu, a man of 70 years whose hands moved with the precision of water finding its path. He wore robes of undyed hemp, faded to the color of old bone, and his eyes held that particular quality of stillness that comes only from decades of attention to the smallest things, the angle of a flower stem, the sound of water beginning to boil, the space between one breath and the next. On this particular morning, a young samurai named Takeshi arrived at the tea house. He had traveled for 3 days from Edo, where his reputation as a scholar had grown considerable. He had studied under the greatest Zen masters, memorized 1,000 sutras, and could debate the finest points of doctrine with brilliant precision. His robes were of the finest silk, his swords perfectly balanced, and his mind sharp as winter starlight. He had come to Master Rikyu because he had heard the old man possessed some secret teaching, some final understanding that would complete his knowledge. The master welcomed him with a bow and began to prepare tea. The charcoal glowed with even heat. The iron kettle sang its ancient song. Takeshi watched, waiting for the teaching to begin, but the master simply moved through the familiar motions, purifying the utensils, warming the bowl, measuring the powder with absolute attention. Finally, unable to contain himself, Takeshi began to speak. "Master Rikyu, I have come from far away to learn from you. I have studied the Heart Sutra and understand emptiness. I have practiced Zazen for 10 years and know the nature of mind. I have read the great masters, Dogen, Bankei, Hakuin, and comprehended their teachings. What else is there to know? What final wisdom can you share with me?" As the young samurai spoke, listing his accomplishments and understanding, Master Rikyu began to pour tea into Takeshi's cup. He poured steadily, smoothly, and when the cup was full, he continued pouring. The hot tea spilled over the rim across the tatami mat, staining the perfect surface. Still he poured. Takeshi watched in shock as the tea flooded across the floor, soaking into the woven straw. "Master, stop! The cup is full. No more will go in," Takeshi exclaimed. Only then did Master Rikyu set down the kettle. He looked at the young samurai with infinite kindness and said, "Just so. Like this cup, you are full of your own knowledge and accomplishments. How can I show you anything unless you first empty your cup?" The Buddha taught, "Emptiness is form, and form is emptiness." Consider your own experience, friend. Notice how often we approach life already full of opinions, full of what we think we know, full of our ideas about how things should be. We come to each moment with our cup overflowing with the past, with concepts, with the weight of our own accumulated knowledge. And we wonder why nothing new can enter. We wonder why we feel stuck, why life feels stale, why the teachings we've read 100 times no longer move us. This fullness is exhausting, carrying around everything we think we know, defending our positions, maintaining our expertise. It requires tremendous effort, and it prevents the very thing we seek: fresh experience, genuine encounter, real understanding that comes not from adding more, but from releasing what we think we already possess. What fills your cup right now? Perhaps it's filled with the day you've just lived, conversations that didn't go well, tasks left undone, worries about tomorrow. Perhaps it's filled with your ideas about who you are and who you should be. Perhaps it's filled with plans and goals and the pressure to become something other than what you already are. Can you feel the weight of that fullness? Can you sense how it prevents this moment from truly reaching you? Here is a practice you can carry into your life. Each morning before you begin your day, take 3 conscious breaths and imagine emptying your cup. Let go of who you were yesterday. Release your plans for who you will become. For just these 3 breaths, be empty, open, available to what is rather than what you expect. When you meet someone, empty your cup of judgments and truly see them. When you face a challenge, empty your cup of how you've always done things and meet it fresh. When you sit to eat, empty your cup of distraction and taste your food as if for the first time. Take a gentle breath now and feel your body settling a little deeper. Notice how the tension in your shoulders might be softening. Let yourself rest in this understanding that you don't need to hold on to anything. That emptiness is not lack, but infinite potential. Let us now turn to another teaching, another doorway into the same truth. The monk who carried nothing. In ancient China, during the Tang dynasty, there wandered a monk named Yunmen who owned only 3 things: the tattered robe on his back, a wooden begging bowl worn smooth by countless hands, and a walking staff carved from bamboo. He traveled from village to village, temple to temple, carrying no scrolls, no texts, no possessions beyond these simple necessities. His face bore the deep lines of sun and wind, and countless miles walked in silence. One winter evening, as snow began to fall in soft, heavy flakes, Yunmen arrived at a wealthy monastery built of carved stone and glazed tiles. The abbot who greeted him was named Jingshan, a man who took great pride in his library of sacred texts. 10,000 scrolls lined the monastery walls, sutras copied in gold ink, commentaries bound in silk, texts collected from India, Tibet, and Japan. Jingshan had studied every major teaching, and his monastery attracted scholars from across the empire. The abbot, seeing Yunmen's humble appearance, his lack of books or manuscripts, felt a subtle superiority rise in his chest. After they had shared the evening meal, simple rice and pickled vegetables, Jingshan led Yunmen to the great library. Lamplight flickered across the endless rows of scrolls. The smell of aged paper and sandalwood filled the air. "Venerable Yunmen," Jingshan said, gesturing to the vast collection, "here is preserved the wisdom of 1,000 years. Here are the words of the Buddha himself, the commentaries of the great masters, the essential teachings. I have spent my life studying these texts, understanding every school of thought, every philosophical position. Tell me, how do you practice without such resources? How do you keep the Dharma alive without texts to guide you?" Yunmen stood in silence for a long moment, snowflakes melting in his hair, his eyes reflecting the lamplight like still water. Then he raised his walking staff and struck the floor once, sharply. The sound rang out in the silent library, clear, immediate, impossible to misunderstand. Then he bowed and walked outside into the falling snow. Jingshan followed him, his mind racing, trying to understand what the simple gesture meant. He found Yunmen standing in the courtyard, face upturned to the sky, tongue out to catch snowflakes like a child. The monk was smiling, genuinely delighted by the cold, wet touch of snow on his skin. "Master Yunmen, please explain your teaching. What did the striking of your staff mean? What principle were you demonstrating?" Yunmen looked at him with infinite patience and said, "When you are hungry, eat. When you are tired, sleep. When snow falls, taste it. The moon needs no book to teach it how to shine. The river needs no scripture to know its way to the sea. All the words in your library are fingers pointing at the moon. Don't mistake the finger for the moon itself. The Buddha said, "Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for many generations. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it." Here is the paradox we face, dear friend. We hunger for wisdom, yet we often confuse the map for the territory, the menu for the meal, the words about truth for truth itself. We collect teachings like treasures, we memorize beautiful phrases, we study and analyze and discuss, and somehow the immediacy of living slips through our fingers. We know what the Buddha said about mindfulness, but do we taste our tea? We understand impermanence intellectually, but do we feel the snowflake melting on our tongue? This is not a criticism of learning or study. Words can point us toward truth, can inspire us, can illuminate our path. But notice how often we hide behind knowledge. We read about meditation instead of sitting. We discuss compassion instead of offering kindness to the difficult person in front of us. We analyze our experience instead of experiencing it. We want the certificate, the credential, the proof that we understand, but we forget that understanding happens not in the head but in the whole body, in the lived moment, in the direct encounter with what is. Consider your own life. How much energy goes into learning about life rather than living it? How many hours spent reading about happiness, peace, and fulfillment while the actual moment passes unnoticed? How often do we plan to be present, intend to be mindful, think about being here now, creating layer upon layer of separation between awareness and the simple fact of breathing, existing, being alive right now? Here is your practice. Choose one ordinary activity today. Washing dishes, walking to your car, drinking water, putting on your shoes. Don't think about it. Don't make it special. Don't try to be mindful. Simply do it. Feel the temperature of the water, the weight of your feet on the ground, the cool liquid in your mouth, the texture of fabric. No commentary, no judgment, no self-conscious monitoring of whether you're doing it right. Just direct, simple contact with the reality of the moment. This is the teaching that no book can give you. Rest now in this understanding. Feel how your breathing continues without your management, how your heart beats without your instruction, how life lives itself through you when you stop interfering. Let yourself sink a little deeper into the support beneath you. Our journey continues with the story of a question that changed everything. The student who asked nothing in a mountain monastery in northern Japan, where winters brought snow that buried the world in silence and summers covered the valleys in wild azaleas. There lived 30 monks who had dedicated their lives to understanding the nature of mind. The monastery was built of dark wood that had weathered to silver gray, with a meditation hall that looked out over an endless expanse of mountains fading into blue distance. Here they sat zazen from before dawn until after dark. Here they worked in gardens and chopped wood and studied koans that had broken open the minds of seekers for 1,000 years. The abbot was named Soen Roshi, a woman of 60 whose presence carried the weight of mountains and the lightness of morning dew. She had trained for 40 years, had received transmission from her teacher, and had the rare quality of being both absolutely settled and completely fluid, like water that has found its level. Her students loved her and feared her, not because she was harsh, but because in her presence all pretense dissolved like mist in sunlight. Among the monks was a young man named Kenji, who had arrived 2 years earlier. He was 24 years old, university educated, brilliant in his way, and he had come to the monastery filled with questions. Questions about the nature of consciousness, questions about free will and determinism, questions about the relationship between mind and body, questions about suffering and its cessation, questions that poured from him like water from a broken dam. In the early months, Soen Roshi had answered his questions patiently, thoroughly, each response like a key fitting perfectly into a lock. But Kenji's questions never ceased. Each answer spawned 10 new questions. His notebook filled with hundreds of pages of recorded teachings cross-referenced and indexed. The other monks began to avoid him, exhausted by his constant need for explanation, his inability to simply sit in silence, his compulsion to understand before he had even experienced. They nicknamed him Question Kenji, sometimes with affection, sometimes with irritation. One afternoon in late spring, after the midday meal, Kenji approached Soen Roshi with another question. She was sitting on the wooden porch of her quarters, mending a torn rakusu, the small rectangular cloth that hung from monks' necks. The air smelled of pine and distant rain. Birds called from the forest. Everything was perfectly ordinary, perfectly complete. "Roshi," Kenji began, his notebook already open, pen ready. "I've been contemplating the teaching about no self, and I'm struggling to reconcile it with the experience of continuity and personal identity. If there is no self, then who is it that experiences this continuity? Who remembers yesterday, who makes choices, and furthermore, if..." Soen Roshi held up her hand, and Kenji fell silent. She set down her mending, looked at him with eyes that seemed to see through to his bones, and said, "Kenji, you have been here for 2 years. You have asked me 637 questions. I have answered everyone. Tell me, are you any closer to peace?" The young monk opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. Tears unexpectedly filled his eyes. He shook his head. "Close your notebook," Soen Roshi said gently. "For the next 3 months, ask me no questions, none. Not about the teachings, not about your practice, not about anything. Simply be here, sit zazen, sweep the floors, eat your rice, watch the seasons change. And when the 3 months are complete, if you still have a question, come and ask me." Kenji bowed, and something in him broke open, not painfully, but like an overripe fruit splitting to reveal the seed inside. For 3 months he asked nothing. At first his mind screamed with questions that had nowhere to go. He wrote them in his notebook, then stopped writing. He rehearsed them silently, then let them fade. He noticed how questions arose from a hunger that couldn't be satisfied by answers. How each answer was like food that made him hungrier. How his questioning was a way of staying separate from his actual experience. A way of remaining safely in his head instead of dropping into the vulnerable reality of not knowing. Slowly, something shifted. He began to notice the weight of his body on the zafu, the coolness of the meditation hall in early morning, the exact quality of light as it changed through the day. He heard the sound of rain on the roof as rain on the roof, not as a metaphor for impermanence. He felt sadness as sadness, joy as joy, boredom as boredom, without immediately asking what they meant, where they came from, what they said about his progress. When the 3 months ended, Soen Roshi saw him approaching across the garden and smiled. Before Kenji could speak, she asked, "Do you have a question for me?" Kenji stood there, morning light slanting through the pines, his shadow long on the raked gravel. He opened his mouth and then he began to laugh. Deep, genuine laughter that came from his belly and shook his whole body. "Roshi," he said, "I came to ask you something, but I've completely forgotten what it was." Soen Roshi bowed deeply to him. "Now your training can truly begin." The Buddha taught, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Can you feel the truth in this, friend? We live in an age of endless information, infinite questions, perpetual seeking. We can ask the internet anything and receive 10,000 answers in seconds. We read and listen and consume wisdom teachings until our minds are glutted with knowledge, and still the heart remains hungry. Still the soul feels incomplete. This is because questions of the mind can only be answered by the mind, and the mind's answers always leave us wanting more. They cannot touch the deeper hunger, the longing not for understanding but for direct experience, for the taste of reality unfiltered by thought. Your questions about peace cannot bring peace. Only the actual experience of peace can do that. Your questions about love cannot teach you love. Only loving and being loved can do that. Your questions about the present moment keep you locked in thought about the present moment rather than actually simply being present. Notice how this works in your own experience. When you're worried about the future, you might ask yourself 100 questions. What will happen? How will I handle it? What if it goes wrong? What should I do? And each question spins another thread of anxiety, builds another layer of separation between you and the moment you're actually in, which is not the future, but now, always now. And this now contains no problem that thinking can solve. This doesn't mean questions have no place. Genuine inquiry, the kind that comes from deep wondering rather than anxious seeking, can open doors. But so much of our questioning is actually a form of resistance, a way of staying in the familiar territory of thinking rather than dropping into the unknown territory of direct experience. We ask and ask and ask because answers feel safer than the vast silence of simply being. Here is a practice that might serve you. For one full day or even 1 hour, if a day feels impossible, refrain from asking yourself questions. When a question arises, what should I eat? Why did they say that? What does this mean? Am I doing this right? Simply notice the question and let it dissolve without answering it. Instead, pay attention to what is actually here. Not your thoughts about what's here, but the direct sensory experience. Sounds, sensations, sights, smells. You'll be amazed how much energy you reclaim when you're not constantly interrogating reality, and how much more vividly you experience life when you're not filtering it through endless questions. Take a gentle breath now. Feel how the air fills your lungs without you asking it to. Notice how your body knows exactly what to do. Let yourself rest in this not knowing that is actually the deepest knowing of all. We now explore a teaching about seeing what is truly there. The painter who stopped improving. In the ancient city of Hangzhou during the Song dynasty, when art and poetry flourished like lotus flowers in summer ponds, there lived a painter named Li Mei. She was 47 years old and had devoted her entire life to mastering the art of painting bamboo. Her studio occupied the upper room of a modest house near West Lake, where morning mist rose from the water like breath, and the mountains in the distance appeared and disappeared like thoughts arising and dissolving in the mind. Li Mei had studied with the great masters. She knew every brushstroke technique, every way of mixing ink to create exactly the right shade, every method for capturing the quality of new bamboo shoots versus mature stalks, wet bamboo versus dry, bamboo in wind versus bamboo in stillness. Her paintings sold for considerable sums. Collectors traveled from far provinces to commission her work. She had achieved what many artists only dream of: technical mastery, recognition, success. Yet she was profoundly unhappy. Each morning she would rise before dawn, prepare her ink, lift her brush, and face the blank silk with a feeling of dread. The paintings she produced were perfect, everyone said so. Each blade of bamboo was rendered with flawless precision, each joint positioned exactly right, each leaf curved at the proper angle. But something was missing. The paintings were correct but lifeless, accurate but empty, like beautiful corpses. She knew the form of bamboo, but she had lost the spirit. In desperation, she sought out a Zen master who lived in a hermitage in the mountains above the city. His name was Master Huineng, and he was famous for never answering questions directly. The hermitage was simple, a single room built against a cliff face with one wall open to the sky. Rain and wind and sunlight entered freely. Birds nested in the rafters. The master wore patched robes and grew vegetables in a small garden where everything seemed to grow wild and perfectly at the same time. Li Mei brought one of her bamboo paintings and spread it before the master. "Master Hui Neng," she said, "I have perfected my technique, but my art has died. What am I doing wrong? How can I bring life to my paintings?" The master studied the painting for a long time, his weathered face expressionless. Finally, he said, "Your painting is perfect. That is the problem." "I don't understand," Li Mei replied. "Come," the master said, rising with surprising fluidity for his age. He led her outside to where a grove of bamboo grew at the edge of his garden. "Look," he said. Li Mei looked. She saw bamboo, the same bamboo she had painted 1,000 times. She was about to say she didn't understand when the master said, "No, don't look with your painter's eyes, don't look with your knowledge, see?" She stood there, confused, trying to understand what he meant. Minutes passed. The master simply stood beside her, breathing, existing, not teaching, not explaining. Slowly, Li Mei's mind began to quiet. The categories she normally used: this is good bamboo for painting, this angle would be difficult to capture, this color would require 3 parts ink to 1 part water. These thoughts arose and fell away. And in the space they left, something else emerged. She saw that no 2 stalks were identical. She saw that the bamboo didn't arrange itself according to principles of composition, but grew however it grew. Some stalks straight, some curved, some strong, some broken. She saw birds landing and taking off, causing the whole grove to shiver and sway. She saw the way light filtered through the leaves, creating patterns that changed moment by moment. She saw it was alive, imperfect, wild, complete. "I see it," she whispered. Tears ran down her face, though she couldn't have said why. "Now you can paint," the master said. "Or perhaps now you no longer need to." Li Mei returned to her studio, and for 3 months she did not paint. She simply sat in her room and looked out at the bamboo growing wild by the lake. She watched it in rain and sun, in wind and stillness, in morning and evening. She stopped trying to capture it and allowed it to enter her. When she finally lifted her brush again, her hand moved differently. Less controlled, more responsive, not imposing her knowledge onto the silk, but allowing the bamboo's nature to flow through her onto the page. The paintings she created were technically imperfect. Some brushstrokes were hesitant, some leaves were oddly shaped, some stalks leaned at strange angles. But they were alive. Anyone who looked at them felt the wind in the bamboo, heard the rustling of leaves, sensed the wild growing spirit of the plant itself. She never became as famous as before. Collectors who wanted perfect bamboo paintings went elsewhere. But the few who understood paid nothing and received paintings freely. And Li Mei, for the first time in decades, loved what she did. The Buddha said, "The problem is you think you have time. And also, if you truly loved yourself, you could never hurt another." But perhaps most relevant to Li Mei's story, he taught, as the Fletcher whittles and makes straight his arrows, so the master directs his straying thoughts. Yet there comes a point when the Fletcher must stop whittling. When the arrow is ready to fly, when effort transforms into effortlessness. Consider your own experience, dear friend. How much of your life is spent perfecting yourself, improving yourself, fixing yourself, making yourself better? You read self-help books, you practice techniques, you analyze your flaws, you strive to become some ideal version of who you think you should be. And there is nothing wrong with sincere effort, with learning and growing. But notice what happens when perfection becomes the goal. Notice how the striving creates tension, how the constant self-improvement project implies that who you are right now is not enough, how the pursuit of perfection prevents you from ever arriving in your actual life. This is exhausting, isn't it? To always be in the process of becoming rather than simply being. to always measure yourself against some standard and find yourself lacking, to critique every action, every word, every thought, searching for errors to correct. You become like Li Mei, technically masterful but spiritually dead, going through the motions of living while missing the aliveness itself. What if you stopped improving for just a little while? Not forever, not giving up on growth or learning, but simply pausing the constant project of self-betterment. What if you looked at your life the way the Zen master invited Li Mei to look at the bamboo, without judgment, without the filter of how it should be, just seeing what actually is? Your life, like the bamboo grove, is imperfect, messy, wild, and complete. You have pain and joy, strength and weakness, beauty and ugliness, all growing together, all part of the whole. Here is a practice. Each evening before you sleep, instead of reviewing the day's failures and planning tomorrow's improvements, simply acknowledge 3 things that were exactly as they were. Not good or bad, not right or wrong, just what was. Today I felt tired in the afternoon. Today I spoke harshly to someone I love. Today the sky was gray. No judgment, no fixing, just recognition. This practice of seeing without improving begins to relax the tyranny of perfection and allows life as it is to be enough. Let yourself breathe now, easy and natural. Notice how your body is just as it is, not perfect, not improved, simply here, alive, breathing, and how this is actually a kind of miracle when you stop demanding it be different. Let us now turn to a story about the freedom found in stopping. The farmer who gave up in rural Korea, in a valley where rice paddies stretched like mirrors reflecting the sky. There lived a farmer named Park Jin-ho. He was 53 years old, with hands like tree roots and a back bent from decades of planting and harvesting. He had inherited his farm from his father, who had inherited it from his father, going back 7 generations. 20 acres of rice, a small vegetable garden, a modest house with a thatched roof that leaked when the monsoon rains came hard. Jin-ho was known throughout the village as the hardest working man anyone had ever seen. He woke before the roosters, worked until after dark, and never took a day of rest. His rice paddies were perfectly maintained, each plant spaced exactly, each berm precisely built, each irrigation channel kept scrupulously clear. He consulted almanacs and weather patterns and adjusted his planting by days and hours. He used the latest techniques, the best fertilizers, the most carefully selected seeds. His yields were good, not exceptional, but reliable, steady, respectable. And yet, for all his effort, he could barely survive. Some years there was enough, some years not quite. The market price fluctuated unpredictably. Weather could destroy months of work in a single afternoon. His children had left for the city, seeking easier lives. His wife had died 3 years earlier, worn out by the same hard labor that was wearing him to bone. He had worked so hard for so long, and for what? He would die and leave the farm to no one, and all his effort would vanish like smoke. One spring morning, as he prepared to begin the season's planting, something in Jin-ho simply stopped. He was standing in the middle of a dry rice paddy, holding a bundle of seedlings, and he felt a weariness so profound it seemed to come from the earth itself, from the bones of his ancestors, from the future that would come whether he planted or not. He set down the seedlings, walked back to his house, and sat on the porch. And he did nothing. The neighbors noticed. At first they thought he was ill. They brought soup and concern. When they realized he had simply stopped working, they were scandalized. "The rice won't plant itself," they said. "What will you eat? Have you gone mad?" Jin-ho simply smiled and said, "I'm tired. I'm going to rest now." Days passed. The optimal planting time came and went. The paddies remained empty. Jin-ho sat on his porch, watching the sky, listening to birds, noticing things he had never noticed before. How the clouds formed and dissolved, how shadows moved across the mountains, how the quality of light changed through the day. He slept when he was tired, ate simple food when he was hungry, walked through his fields not to work them but simply to walk. A strange peace settled over him, the kind of peace that comes only when you finally put down a burden you've been carrying so long you forgot it was a burden. One afternoon, a Buddhist monk was walking past Jinho's farm on his way to a temple in the next valley. He saw the farmer sitting in meditation-like stillness on the porch and stopped to offer a blessing. Jinho invited him to share tea. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then the monk asked, "Why do you sit here instead of working your fields?" Jinho considered the question. "For 40 years I've been trying to force life to give me something. Security, success, survival. I've pushed and struggled and fought against weather and markets and my own exhaustion. And I realized that life doesn't care about my effort. The rain comes whether I worry about it or not. The crops grow or they don't. I will die whether I work hard or rest easy, so I've given up." The monk smiled. Given up on what? On trying to control the uncontrollable, on believing my effort determines the outcome, on thinking I know better than life itself what should happen. And what has this giving up brought you? Jinho looked out at his empty fields, at the weeds beginning to grow, at the wild grasses taking over, and he said, "Everything. I had spent my whole life so busy surviving that I never lived. Now I live. Whatever comes, comes. Whatever doesn't, doesn't. For the first time I am free." The monk bowed to him. "You have found what many seek in monasteries and never find." After the monk left, something interesting happened. Jinho noticed that some wild rice was growing at the edges of his paddies, the kind of rice that plants itself, needs no irrigation, requires no maintenance. It was a smaller grain, less profitable but edible. He gathered some seeds and scattered them loosely across one paddy, not carefully spacing them, not following any technique, just letting them fall where they fell. They grew. Not perfectly, not in rows, but they grew. He harvested what grew and found it was enough for him to eat for a year. He scattered seeds again the next spring, the same careless way. Again, enough grew. He lived this way for 20 more years until he died peacefully in his sleep at 73. The neighbors thought he had wasted his life, but those who visited him in those final years noticed something. He was happy. Genuinely, deeply, simply happy. He worked when he felt moved to work, rested when he was tired, gave away what he didn't need and never worried about tomorrow. He died owning nothing and lacking nothing. The Buddha taught in the Dhammapada, everything is changeable. Everything appears and disappears. There is no blissful peace until one passes beyond the agony of life and death. But also, those who are free of resentful thoughts surely find peace. Can you feel how much energy you spend trying to control the uncontrollable, friend? Think about it honestly. How much mental effort goes into worrying about what might happen, planning how to prevent bad outcomes, rehearsing conversations, trying to manage other people's opinions of you, attempting to guarantee that things will turn out the way you want? It's exhausting. And notice this carefully. Your effort doesn't actually control these things. You cannot think hard enough to prevent accidents, worry intensely enough to ensure success, plan thoroughly enough to eliminate uncertainty. This is perhaps the hardest teaching to accept because it seems to suggest that we shouldn't try, that we shouldn't care, that we should be passive victims of circumstance. But that's not what Jinho discovered. He didn't stop caring, he started living. He didn't become passive, he became responsive. He didn't give up on life, he gave up on the illusion that his anxiety and effort could control life's unfolding. There's a profound difference between wise effort and struggle. Wise effort is planting seeds in spring because that's what responds to the season. Struggle is staying up all night worrying about whether the seeds will grow. Wise effort is doing your work with full attention, Struggle is doing your work while mentally rehearsing all the ways it might fail. Wise effort is participating in your life. Struggle is fighting with reality, demanding it be other than it is. What are you struggling against right now? Not trying to change or improve. That may be wise effort. But struggling against, fighting with reality, demanding life conform to your ideas of how it should be, exhausting yourself trying to control what cannot be controlled. Maybe it's struggling against the fact that your body ages, that people you love make their own choices, that work is sometimes hard, that you cannot guarantee any particular future. This struggling is what Jinho gave up, and it freed him to actually live. Here is a practice to experiment with. For just 1 hour, or even 10 minutes if an hour seems impossible, give up controlling anything. Let things be exactly as they are. If you feel anxious without trying to fix it. If something happens you don't like, let it be that way without immediately strategizing how to change it. If someone disagrees with you, let them disagree. Don't collapse into passivity. If action is needed, act. But give up the inner struggle, the resistance, the demand that reality be different. Notice what happens when you stop fighting. Often, paradoxically, you discover you have more energy and clarity to actually respond wisely to what is. Take a deep, gentle breath. Feel how your body is already doing its best to rest, to release, to let go. Trust this natural unwinding. Let yourself sink deeper into the support beneath you, knowing that you don't have to control your sleep, your dreams, or what tomorrow brings. Let yourself rest in this giving up that is actually the most profound giving in to the truth of this moment. Our journey continues with a teaching about the mirror that asks nothing. The Mirror Maker's Daughter. In the city of Edo, before it became Tokyo, when the Tokugawa shogunate ruled and samurai walked the streets in pairs, there was a shop that made mirrors. The shop was small, tucked between a sack merchant and a fabric seller with a wooden sign that bore the character for reflection. Inside, the air smelled of metal polish and wax, and light from rice paper windows fell soft across workbenches worn smooth by generations of hands. The shop belonged to a master craftsman named Tanaka Isamu, who had learned the art from his father, in an unbroken line going back 200 years. The mirrors they made were prized throughout Japan. Perfect surfaces that reflected without distortion, bronze polished to a clarity that rivaled the finest glass. Nobles sent for these mirrors, temples commissioned them for sacred use, and courtesans paid fortunes for their accuracy. Tanaka had one child, a daughter named Hana, who at 22 years old had become as skilled as her father. She could polish bronze to impossible smoothness, could detect the slightest flaw in a surface, could create mirrors that seemed to hold light like water holds the moon. She worked beside her father in companionable silence, the two of them moving through the precise steps of their craft with the ease of long practice. But Hana carried a sadness that no one could see. She had been born with a birthmark that covered the right side of her face, a dark stain that made people look away, made children point, made potential suitors politely decline when her father tried to arrange a marriage. She spent her days creating perfect reflections for others while avoiding her own reflection, covering mirrors as soon as they were complete, never looking at the face she knew would greet her. One day, a Zen nun named Kasai came to the shop. She was perhaps 60 years old, her head shaved, her robes simple and clean, her face lined with years of sitting in meditation. She requested a special mirror, not large, not ornate, but perfectly true in its reflection. As Hana began to work on the commission, the nun visited the shop each day, sitting quietly in the corner, watching the process with patient attention. This made Hana uncomfortable. She felt the nun's eyes on her as she worked, felt exposed in a way she usually avoided. Finally, after a week of these silent visits, Hana asked, Venerable Kasai, why do you watch me? Are you checking that the work is done properly? The nun smiled gently. I am watching the mirror make the mirror. Tell me, Hana, when you polish this bronze, do you judge it? Do you criticize its flaws? Do you wish it were different? No, Hana replied. I simply observe what is there and remove what obscures the reflection. I don't judge the metal. It is what it is. Just so, the nun said. And when the mirror is complete and you look into it, does the mirror judge what it reflects? Of course not. A mirror simply shows what is before it. It has no preference, no opinion. Then why, Kasai asked, her voice infinitely kind, do you judge yourself so harshly? Why do you look at your face and see something wrong while the mirror simply shows a face neither beautiful nor ugly, just as it is? Hana felt tears rise, hot and unexpected. Because others judge, because I am not as I should be, because this mark makes me ugly. The nun rose and came to stand beside Hana's workbench. Show me the mirror you are making. Hana held up the bronze disc still in process, its surface mottled and imperfect. The nun looked into it and said, I see an old woman with a face lined by time, a head without hair, eyes that droop with age. Is this mirror ugly because it shows these things? Should it refuse to reflect this old face? No, the mirror is just being a mirror. It reflects whatever is before it. And if I put this mirror aside and pick up another perfectly polished, will it refuse to show my old face? No. A perfect mirror reflects perfectly whatever is before it. Then what makes you different? You are also a mirror reflecting life's experiences, showing the truth of what is. This mark on your face is simply what is reflected. The mirror does not judge its reflection. Why do you? Hana stood silent, the truth of this sinking deeper than words could reach. Kasai continued, For 22 years, you have seen your face through the eyes of others' judgments, through your own wish to be different. But the mark simply is like my old face simply is, like everything in this world simply is. It is not beautiful or ugly until thinking makes it so. A true mirror, like the mirror of your true self, reflects without judgment. Can you look at your face with the same neutral clarity with which you look at bronze? That evening, after her father had gone to sleep, Hana took one of the completed mirrors and for the first time in years looked at her full reflection. At first, she saw what she had always seen, the mark, the flaw, the thing that made her wrong. But then she tried to look the way she looked at the bronze she polished, simply observing without judgment, without the story of ugly or beautiful. She saw a face, 2 eyes dark and clear, a nose, a mouth that had smiled and frowned and lived 22 years. Black hair pulled back, revealing a high forehead. And yes, a birthmark, deep purple, covering half her face like spilled wine. She saw it as a mirror sees, as simply what was there. And in seeing it that way, something shifted. The pain that had lived in her chest for so long loosened, not gone, but somehow less solid, less defining. She didn't suddenly think herself beautiful, but she stopped believing she was ugly. There was just a face, her face marked by life before life had even properly begun. And it was enough. It was what it was. The Buddha taught, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. But also, nothing can harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded. What tyranny we impose on ourselves with our judgments, friend. Notice how you cannot look at yourself, your face, your body, your personality, your life, with the simple neutrality of a mirror. Instead, you see through layers of judgment. Too fat, too thin, too old, too young, too much, too little, not enough, never enough. And it's not just physical appearance. You judge your emotions. You shouldn't feel anxious, shouldn't be sad, should be more grateful, more positive, more spiritual. You judge your thoughts. Bad person for thinking that, weak person for feeling this, wrong, wrong, always wrong. You judge your past, your choices, your mistakes, carrying them like stones in your pockets, never putting them down. You judge your present against some imagined ideal. You judge your future before it's even arrived. This constant judging creates so much suffering. It prevents you from simply being with what is. It puts you at war with reality, with yourself, with the truth of your human experience. A mirror doesn't do this. A mirror receives whatever appears before it with perfect equanimity, beauty and ugliness, young and old, joy and sorrow, and it reflects without preference. This is what the Buddhist practice of equanimity truly means. Not that we don't care, but that we don't add judgment to what we care about. Consider how this might transform your life. What if you could look at your anxiety the way a mirror reflects a storm cloud, not as something wrong, just as weather in the mind? What if you could see your aging face the way a mirror sees it, as the truth of time passing, neither tragedy nor triumph, just what is? What if you could observe your thoughts and emotions without immediately judging them as good or bad, spiritual or not, progress or regression? Here is a practice for cultivating this mirror-like awareness. Sit comfortably and simply observe your experience without labeling it. Notice a thought arising. Don't call it good or bad, just thought. Notice a sensation. Don't call it pleasant or unpleasant, just sensation. Notice an emotion. Don't call it acceptable or unacceptable, just emotion. Practice this for 5 minutes each day. You'll find it incredibly difficult because the judging mind is so strong, so habitual. But in the gaps between judgments, you'll touch something ancient and peaceful. The awareness that simply witnesses without adding story, like a mirror that reflects without becoming what it reflects. Let yourself breathe now, easy and soft. Notice how your body doesn't judge itself for being tired or awake, for feeling heavy or light. It simply is what it is, moment by moment, responding to what's needed without a committee meeting about whether it should. Rest in this natural being, this mirror-like presence that has been here all along, beneath all your judgments. We now explore a teaching about the seed that knew nothing. The gardener who planted wrong. In a Tibetan monastery perched high in the Himalayas where prayer flags snapped in winds that tasted of snow even in summer, there lived a monk named Dorje. He was 37 years old and had been assigned the duty of maintaining the monastery garden, a small terraced plot where vegetables grew in the brief growing season, providing food for the 50 monks who made this austere place their home. Dorje took his responsibility seriously. Too seriously, perhaps. He consulted every text he could find on agriculture, studied the traditional methods passed down through generations, calculated the optimal planting dates according to the lunar calendar and the sutras. He prepared the soil with meticulous care, adding precisely measured amounts of compost, turning it to exactly the right depth, creating perfectly straight rows at exactly the correct spacing. When the time came to plant seeds for radishes, turnips, and hardy greens, Dorje followed every instruction to the letter. He planted each seed at the prescribed depth, watered with the recommended amount, protected the seedbed from birds with careful netting. Each morning he inspected the garden, checking for signs of germination, worried that he might have missed some crucial step. The seeds did not sprout. Days passed into weeks. Other gardens in the valley began to show green shoots pushing through the soil. The garden at the neighboring monastery, maintained by an old monk who seemed to plant randomly and carelessly, was already thick with healthy plants. But Dorje's garden remained stubbornly bare. He consulted the texts again, wondering what he had done wrong. Had he planted too deep, too shallow? Was the soil too rich or not rich enough? Had he watered too much or too little? His mind churned with questions and calculations. He dug up a few seeds to examine them and found them rotted, killed perhaps by too much water or wrong temperature or some fungus his imperfect knowledge hadn't anticipated. In frustration and shame, Dorje went to the abbot, an elderly lama named Tenzin Gyatso, whose eyes held both the sharpness of mountain ice and the warmth of butter lamps. "Rinpoche," Dorje said, "I have failed. The garden I was entrusted with has produced nothing. I followed every instruction perfectly, and yet nothing grows. I am not fit for this task." The abbot listened with his customary patience, then said, "Come with me." He led Dorje outside the monastery walls to a spot where the land had not been cultivated, where no one had planted anything. Yet here grew wild plants, tough grasses, small flowers, herbs that had no name but sent their roots deep into rocky soil. They were not arranged in rows, not spaced optimally, not provided with amended soil or measured water. They simply grew because they were alive, and because seeds had fallen here and found a way. "Tell me, Dorje," the abbot asked, "who planted these?" "No one, Rinpoche. They planted themselves." "Did they consult texts to know how deep to plant their seeds? Did they measure the soil nutrients? Did they calculate the optimal time?" "No, Rinpoche." "Then how do they know to grow?" Dorje was silent. The abbot knelt, his old knees cracking, and brushed his hand across the wild plants. "The seed knows nothing. It doesn't know it's supposed to become a plant. It doesn't study how to germinate. It doesn't worry whether it's doing it right. It simply responds to conditions, moisture, darkness, warmth, and life unfolds from within it. The growing is not something it does, it's something it is." He stood, steadying himself with his walking stick. "You have tried to control life with your knowledge, Dorje. You have tried to force the seeds to grow according to your understanding of how they should grow. But life doesn't work that way. The seed has its own wisdom, far older than any book, far deeper than any technique. Your job was not to make the seeds grow. Your job was to provide conditions and then trust the process. Instead, you smothered them with your anxiety and your need to get it right." Tears ran down Dorje's face. "Then I have wasted the seeds and failed the community. You have learned something far more valuable than a garden of vegetables," the abbot said gently. "You have learned that you cannot control life, only participate in it. Now go plant again, but this time plant with trust rather than fear, with care rather than control. Put the seeds in the ground, give them water and sun, and then let them be. If they grow, they grow. If they don't, you've fed the soil for next year. Either way, you will have done your part." Dorje planted again, and this time something was different. He still prepared the soil, still planted at a reasonable depth, still watered regularly. But he didn't obsess. He didn't check every day with anxious expectation. He didn't hover over the garden with worried energy. He planted and let go, trusting that the seeds contained within themselves everything they needed to become what they were meant to become. And they grew. Not perfectly. Some rows were thicker than others, some plants stronger, some weaker. It wasn't the ideal garden he had envisioned, but it was a real garden, alive and growing, producing food for the community. Dorje learned to love its imperfection, to appreciate that each plant found its own way in its own time, and that his job was simply to participate in the process, not control it. The Buddha taught, "Believe nothing, no matter where you read it or who has said it, not even if I have said it, unless it agrees with your own reason and your own common sense." And also, health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth, faithfulness the best relationship. But perhaps most relevant here is the teaching that wisdom comes not from accumulating knowledge, but from understanding the nature of things as they are. Can you feel the truth in this story, friend? How much of your suffering comes from trying to control what cannot be controlled? You have ideas about how your life should unfold. Your career should progress this way. Your relationship should develop that way. Your spiritual practice should produce these results. You read books, you make plans, you follow instructions, you do everything right. And then you're devastated when life doesn't cooperate with your script. This is because you're trying to make life grow according to your understanding rather than trusting that life has its own intelligence, its own timing, its own wisdom that preceded your birth and will continue after your death. You are like Dorje, standing over the garden with anxious energy, disturbing the seeds with your worry, your checking, your need to see results according to your schedule. Consider your own life. Where are you trying to force outcomes? Perhaps in your spiritual practice, you meditate and expect to feel peaceful, and when you don't, you think you're doing it wrong. You practice kindness and expect people to respond with kindness, and when they don't, you feel failed. You do all the right things for your health and expect your body to obey, and when it doesn't, you're angry and betrayed. But life is like the seed. It has its own nature, its own unfolding, and your job is not to control it, but to create conditions and then trust. You can plant seeds of kindness without controlling how others respond. You can meditate without demanding specific states arise. You can care for your health without requiring your body to never age, never hurt, never disappoint. You can participate fully while holding your expectations lightly. Here is a practice to help release the illusion of control. Each morning, set your intentions for the day. How you want to show up, what you want to offer, what actions you plan to take. But then add this phrase, and I release attachment to the outcome. Say it out loud. I will do my work with full attention and I release attachment to the outcome. I will speak kindly to my family and I release attachment to the outcome. I will take care of my body and I release attachment to the outcome. This doesn't mean you don't care, it means you recognize that your job is the planting, not the harvest. The harvest comes in its own time, or it doesn't, and either way, you've done your part. Take a gentle breath now, and notice how the breath breathes itself. You don't have to control it, manage it, make it happen correctly. It simply flows in and out, trusting the body's ancient wisdom. Let yourself relax into this trust. Let yourself stop trying to make things happen and instead allow things to unfold. Feel how much energy this releases, how much softer life becomes when you're not constantly gripping it, forcing it, demanding it conform to your ideas. Let us now turn to a teaching about the river that asked for nothing. The student of flow. There was a young woman named Suki who lived in a village beside a great river in southern Japan. The river was called Kumano, and it flowed from mountains far to the north, through forests and valleys, past rice fields and fishing villages, until it emptied into the sea. Suki had lived beside this river her entire life. She was born to the sound of its flowing, fell asleep each night to its constant voice, measured the seasons by its rising and falling. At 20 years old, Suki's life felt impossibly difficult. Her parents wanted her to marry a merchant's son she didn't love. Her heart longed to study calligraphy in the capital city, but women were rarely given such opportunities. She felt trapped between duty and desire, between who she was expected to be and who she felt herself to be. The contradiction created constant pain, a feeling of being torn in two directions at once, unable to satisfy anyone, including herself. One morning, unable to sleep, she walked to the river before dawn. The water was dark, reflecting the last stars. And as she sat on the bank, a Zen monk came walking along the path. He was young, perhaps 30, with kind eyes and patched robes, carrying a simple wooden staff. He nodded to Suki and sat beside her, not speaking, simply being present. After a long silence, Suki said, "I don't know what to do." The monk didn't ask for explanation. He simply pointed to the river and said, Watch. They sat and watched as the sun rose, as light turned the water from black to silver to dancing gold. The river flowed constantly, never stopping, never hesitating. When it encountered a rock, it didn't stop and debate whether to go left or right. It simply flowed around, finding the path of least resistance. When the banks narrowed, the river moved faster. When they widened, it spread out and slowed. It made no complaints about obstacles, no demands that its path be straight. It simply was what it was, going where it was going in the only way it could go. "Do you see how the river flows?" the monk asked. "Yes." "Does it struggle?" "No." "Does it stop to argue with the stones in its path? Does it demand that the banks be wider or narrower? Does it compare itself to other rivers? Does it worry about whether it's flowing correctly? No. Does it refuse to move because it would prefer a different destination? No, Suki said, and she began to understand. The river has no choice about where it goes. Geography determines its path. But within those constraints, it flows with perfect freedom, perfect naturalness. It doesn't spend energy fighting its circumstances. It doesn't exhaust itself wishing for a different path. It simply responds to what is, moment by moment, finding its way with absolute trust. "But I'm not a river," Suki protested. "I have to make choices. I have people pulling me in different directions. I have my own dreams and others' expectations." "True," the monk said. "You're not a river. You're a human being, which means you have something the river doesn't have. The capacity to create suffering by resisting what is. The river cannot say, 'I don't want to flow this way.' But you can say, 'I don't want my life to be this way.' And in that saying, in that resistance to what is, you create enormous pain. So I should just accept everything? Just surrender to what others want? Have no desires of my own?" "No," the monk said gently. "Watch the river more carefully. It responds to reality, to gravity, to the shape of the land. Within that reality, it has tremendous power. It carves canyons, it nourishes valleys, it shapes the world. But it doesn't waste energy fighting with gravity or demanding that water flow uphill. That's the difference. You can honor your deepest nature. You can move toward what calls you. You can shape your life. But you can do it like the river, by working with reality rather than fighting against it. What is reality in my situation? That you're 20 years old in this village at this time in history. That your parents have certain expectations shaped by their culture and their fear for your security. That you have a longing for something different. These are the facts, like the rocks and banks that shape the river's flow. You can spend all your energy raging against these facts, wishing you were born different, wishing your parents were different, wishing the world was more just, more open. And that rage might feel righteous, but it's like the river trying to flow backward. It will exhaust you and change nothing. Or you can accept these as the current conditions and ask, given this reality, what is possible? What can I create? How can I flow? Suki sat with this, watching the river's constant movement. Finally, she said, "I think I understand. I can speak honestly to my parents about my longing to study, not with anger or ultimatum, but with respect for both their concerns and my own truth. I can explore possibilities I haven't considered, perhaps a compromise, perhaps a way to study while also honoring some of their wishes. I can stop tearing myself apart trying to be two different people and instead be fully myself while also fully present to the reality of my circumstances. I can flow." The monk bowed to her. "Now you begin to understand. The river doesn't stop being a river. It's absolutely true to its nature, but it doesn't fight with reality. It works with what is. This is the secret to ending your suffering. Not changing your circumstances, not becoming someone else, but being fully yourself while fully accepting reality." Suki returned to her village and spoke to her parents differently that day. She didn't demand or rebel. She honestly shared her longing, listened to their fears, and together they found a path no one had previously imagined. She would marry, but to a scholar's son who supported her studies, and she would learn calligraphy while also creating a life that honored both her traditions and her dreams. The solution wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was real, and it was hers, and it flowed naturally from working with reality rather than against it. The Buddha taught, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." But also, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. And perhaps most directly related to Suki's story, it is a man's own mind, not his enemy or foe, that lures him to evil ways. Notice how much suffering comes from fighting with reality, dear friend. You don't want to be the age you are, don't want to have the body you have, don't want to face the limitations of your circumstances. Don't want people to be as they are. This resistance creates constant friction, constant pain, like trying to force water to flow uphill. You exhaust yourself and accomplish nothing except your own misery. This doesn't mean passive acceptance of injustice or harmful situations. The river is powerful. It carves stone. It changes landscapes. It creates tremendous transformation. But it does so by working with gravity, not fighting against it. You can create change in your life, can speak truth, can work toward what matters to you, but you can do it with the river's wisdom, by accepting the reality of this moment as the starting point rather than raging that this moment shouldn't exist. Consider where you're fighting reality right now. Maybe it's anger that your body ages, that pain exists, that loss happens. Maybe it's resentment that people aren't who you want them to be. Your partner, your parents, your children, yourself. Maybe it's frustration that your past was what it was, that you made the choices you made, that you can't go back and do it differently. All of this resistance is like the river demanding that rocks not be in its path. The rocks are there. Fighting with that fact doesn't move the rocks, it just exhausts you. Here is a practice. When you notice yourself in conflict with reality, pause and ask, what am I resisting right now? Name it specifically. I'm resisting the fact that I'm tired. I'm resisting the fact that this person is angry with me. I'm resisting the fact that I'm afraid. Then ask, what if I accepted this reality as the water accepts the stone, not approving of it, not liking it, but simply acknowledging it as what is? Then ask, from this point of acceptance, what's actually possible? What can I do, say, or change? You'll find that acceptance doesn't mean passivity. It means clear-eyed engagement with what is, rather than exhausting battles with what isn't. Rest now. Feel your body settling. Notice how gravity works with you, not against you, holding you safely. Notice how your breath flows like the river, without effort, without resistance, simply being what it is. Let yourself flow into rest, into sleep if sleep comes, trusting that there is nowhere you need to be except exactly here. Feel how your body naturally relaxes. Notice the gentle rhythm of your breathing. Take a moment to let these teachings settle into you like seeds into soil. You don't need to remember any specific words. The wisdom is already taking root in the depths of your being. Let yourself sink a little deeper into rest, knowing that you are exactly where you need to be, exactly as you need to be, in this perfect moment. Our journey continues with the story of what happens when we truly see. The beggar who had everything in the ancient city of Varanasi, where the Ganges River flows sacred and eternal, where ghats descend to water that has carried prayers and ashes for 5,000 years, there lived a beggar named Ravi. He sat each day at the same spot on Dashashwamedh Ghat, his bowl before him, his body twisted by some condition that had bent his spine and weakened his legs since birth. He was perhaps 40 years old, though poverty and suffering had aged him beyond his years. His clothes were rags, his body thin as bamboo, his skin darkened by decades under the burning sun. To most who passed, Ravi was invisible. Pilgrims came to bathe in the holy river, merchants hurried past with their goods, priests performed ceremonies, and life flowed around Ravi like water around a stone. Some dropped coins in his bowl without looking at his face. Most simply stepped over him or walked around him, their minds on prayers or business or the countless concerns that fill human consciousness. But there was one man who saw Ravi truly. His name was Ananda, and he was a meditation teacher who had spent 20 years in practice. Ananda walked past Ravi each morning on his way to teach at a small ashram near the river. At first, like everyone else, he simply dropped a coin in the bowl and continued walking. But one day, Ananda really looked at Ravi's face. What he saw stopped him. Ravi's eyes were extraordinary, not in their physical appearance, but in their quality. They were clear as water, deep as wells, and they held something Ananda recognized because he had spent years cultivating it in meditation. Perfect presence, complete peace, the kind of unshakable stillness that most people seek through years of practice and never find. Ananda sat down beside Ravi to the surprise of both the beggar and the people walking past. "Brother," Ananda said, "may I ask you something?" Ravi tilted his head, curious. "You may ask anything. I have been practicing meditation for 20 years. I sit for hours each day, I study the sutras, I work with my mind constantly, trying to find the peace that will free me from suffering. And I have found something, yes, moments of stillness, glimpses of peace. But you, I see in your eyes something I've been seeking. How is this possible? You live in conditions most would call unbearable. You have so little, suffer so much, yet you have peace. How?" Ravi smiled, and his whole face transformed with genuine warmth. "Brother, you practice meditation to find peace. This is good. But tell me, what do you think you lack right now? In this moment, as we sit here, what is missing?" Ananda considered. "I lack complete freedom from suffering. I lack enlightenment. I lack—" "Stop," Ravi said gently. "You speak of what you lack. Now tell me what is here. What is actually present in this moment?" "Well, I'm breathing. I'm alive. The sun is warm. I can hear the river. I can see the people. I can feel the stone beneath me." "And is there anything wrong with this moment exactly as it is?" Ananda paused. "No, not in this moment itself. But this but is where you leave the moment and enter suffering. This moment needs nothing. You are alive, breathing, feeling, experiencing. Life is happening perfectly, but you add to it. You add your idea that something is missing, that you should be different, that this isn't enough. And that addition creates all your pain. But you have genuine hardship," Ananda protested. "You're in pain, you're poor, "I'm sitting here," Ravi said simply. "My body is bent, yes, this is true. I have little money, little food sometimes, little comfort. This is also true, but notice something. These facts exist. I don't argue with them. I don't spend my days thinking I shouldn't be bent, I shouldn't be poor, I shouldn't be here. I'm here. My body is as it is. And in accepting this completely, I found something you're still seeking. Freedom. Freedom from what? From the prison of should. Should is the source of all suffering. Things should be different, I should be different, people should be kinder, life should be easier, God should be more just. Should, an endless argument with reality. And reality never loses these arguments. Reality simply is. When you stop fighting with what is, when you stop adding your shoulds to the moment, you discover that this moment, exactly as it is complete. Ananda felt tears rising. But don't you want your life to be better? Want and should are different things. If someone offers me food, I take it gladly. If my body could be healed, I would welcome it. I prefer warmth to cold, food to hunger, health to sickness. But I don't require these things to be at peace. I don't make my happiness conditional on circumstances being other than they are. You do. You have a healthy body but suffer because you think you should be more spiritual. You have food and shelter but suffer because you think you should have more peace. I have little, but I lack nothing because I don't require the world to be different for me to be whole. They sat in silence for a long time. Finally, Ananda asked, "How did you learn this?" "I had no choice," Ravi said with a soft laugh. "You can choose to practice meditation or not practice. You can choose to seek or not seek. I cannot choose to walk away from these circumstances. They are what they are. So I had two options. Spend my life in rage and misery, fighting with a bent spine and empty pockets, or accept completely what I cannot change and discover that acceptance is freedom. I chose freedom, not because I'm wise, but because I was too exhausted to keep fighting." Ananda bowed deeply. "You are my teacher." "No," Ravi said kindly. "Life is your teacher. I've simply learned the lesson that life teaches everyone eventually. Things are as they are. The question is only whether you learn this with peace or with pain." The Buddha taught, "There is no way to happiness. Happiness is the way." And also, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. But perhaps most powerfully, he taught that suffering is not caused by circumstances, but by our relationship to circumstances, by our resistance to what is, by our insistence that life should be different than it is. Can you feel the revolutionary nature of this teaching, friend? We are conditioned to believe that happiness depends on conditions, on having the right job, the right relationship, the right body, the right amount of money, the right experiences. We spend our lives trying to arrange circumstances perfectly, believing that when everything is just right, then we'll be happy. But circumstances are never perfectly arranged. There's always something wrong, something missing, something not quite as it should be. This is the trap, making peace conditional on conditions. Ravi understood what most miss, that peace is not something circumstances give you, but something you give yourself through unconditional acceptance of what is. This doesn't mean you don't work to improve your life, don't seek growth, don't make changes. It means you stop withholding peace until conditions meet your standards. You stop saying, "I'll be happy when," and instead discover that happiness is available now, not because circumstances are perfect, but because this moment, exactly as it is, doesn't actually require your approval or disapproval to be what it is. Notice your own mind's constant evaluation of whether this moment measures up to your standards. Too hot, too cold, too boring, too busy, too painful, too easy, not meaningful enough, not peaceful enough, not spiritual enough. This perpetual measuring and finding insufficient is what creates suffering, not the actual conditions themselves. Here is a practice that can liberate, for just today or even just this hour. Stop evaluating whether your experience is good enough. Stop checking if this moment meets your standards. Whatever is happening, boredom, excitement, pain, pleasure, clarity, confusion, simply let it be exactly as it is without the additional layer of judgment. Don't make it mean anything about you, about your progress, about whether your life is going well. Let this moment be what it is, with the same neutrality Ravi showed toward his bent spine. It's just what is. And in that allowing, you might taste the freedom Ravi found. Not freedom from circumstances, but freedom within any circumstance. Breathe gently now. Notice how your experience is exactly as it is, neither good nor bad until you say so. Notice how much effort you put into evaluating, into determining if this moment is acceptable, into wishing it were different. What if you could rest from that effort? What if you could simply be here in this imperfect, ordinary, miraculous moment without requiring it to be anything other than exactly what it is? Let us now turn to a teaching about the path that was always beneath our feet. The pilgrim who never arrived. There was once a woman named Mira who lived in a small village in northern India, in the foothills of the Himalayas, where monasteries cling to mountainsides like eagles' nests, and the air is so clear you can see forever. Mira was 35 years old, married to a kind but simple farmer, mother to 3 children, and she lived a life of ordinary difficulty, working hard, sleeping little, worrying about crops and whether there would be enough food through the winter. But Mira carried a deep spiritual longing. She had heard stories of great masters who lived in mountain caves, of sacred sites where miracles occurred, of holy cities where pilgrims found enlightenment. She read scriptures whenever she could find time, practiced meditation in the brief moments between tasks, and dreamed constantly of the day she could leave her ordinary life and seek the extraordinary truth she felt certain existed somewhere beyond the boundaries of her small world. For years, she planned her pilgrimage. She would walk to Varanasi, to Bodh Gaya, to all the holy sites where the Buddha had walked. She would find a true master and receive the teachings that would finally unlock the peace she sought. She saved tiny amounts of money, hiding coins in a jar buried in the garden. She told no one of her plan, afraid her husband would forbid it, afraid she would lose her courage if she spoke her dream aloud. Finally, after years of preparation, when her children were old enough to manage without her for a time, Mira told her husband she was going on pilgrimage. To her surprise, he simply nodded and said, "May you find what you seek." He gave her his blessing, a warm shawl, and food for the journey. Mira set out with joy in her heart. She walked for days, then weeks, heading south toward Varanasi. The journey was harder than she had imagined. Her feet blistered, her back ached, she was lonely and often frightened. But she pushed on, driven by her certainty that enlightenment waited at the end of this path. That suffering was something she had to endure until she reached the goal. After 3 weeks of walking, she came to a small temple at a crossroads. An old woman sat there, impossibly ancient, her face like wrinkled earth, her eyes bright as stars. Mira stopped to rest, and the old woman offered her water from a clay pot. "Where are you going, daughter?" the old woman asked. "To Varanasi, and then to Bodh Gaya, and perhaps to other holy sites. I'm seeking enlightenment, seeking a master who can teach me the truth." The old woman smiled. "And what will you do when you reach these holy places?" "I will meditate there. I will receive teachings. I will find peace." "Can you not meditate here? Can you not find peace in this moment?" "But these are sacred places," Mira protested. The Buddha walked there. Great masters taught there. The very ground is blessed." "And where did the Buddha walk?" the old woman asked. "In India, in the holy sites." "No," the old woman said gently. "The Buddha walked on the earth, the same earth you're standing on now. He breathed air like you're breathing now. He was present in his moments just as you can be present in yours. The sacred is not somewhere else. It's here or nowhere." Mira felt something shift in her chest, a crack in her certainty. But surely it's different in the holy places. Surely the teaching there is more profound. "Teach me," the old woman said. "What?" "Teach me something you've learned on this journey. Share your wisdom with me." Mira thought about it. "I've learned that the path is difficult. I've learned that I'm stronger than I thought. I've learned that kindness exists even among strangers. People have shared food with me, given me shelter. I've learned that my feet hurt, but I can keep walking. I've learned that I miss my family more than I expected." "And where did you learn these things? In a holy place or on the path?" "On the path." "Then the path is the teacher. The journey itself is the temple. Every step you take, you are walking in the sacred place you seek. Every moment of difficulty, every moment of kindness, every blister and every beautiful sunset, every moment of missing your family, this is the teaching. But you don't see it because you think the real teaching is somewhere ahead, somewhere else. Mira sat down on the ground, suddenly exhausted. But I've come so far, I've worked so hard to make this pilgrimage. And that's beautiful, the old woman said. The effort itself is sacred, but tell me truly, when you arrive at Varanasi, will you be there? Or will you be thinking about the next place, the next teaching, the next goal? When will you actually be present? Tears rolled down Mira's face because she knew the truth. Even in her planning, she had not been present. She had lived in her village for 35 years while mentally living somewhere else, somewhere better, somewhere more spiritual. She had walked for 3 weeks while thinking only of arrival, never actually present for the walking itself. She was always leaving where she was to get to where she thought she should be. Go to Varanasi if you wish, the old woman said. Pilgrimages are holy. But know that you could turn around and walk home, and the walking home would be just as sacred as the walking there. You could stay here at this crossroads and this would be as holy as Bodh Gaya. Because the sacred is not a location, it's a quality of attention. It's being fully present to this moment, this breath, this step, wherever you are. Mira did continue to Varanasi, but everything had changed. She walked present to the walking. When her feet hurt, she felt them hurting without wishing it different. When she felt afraid, she acknowledged the fear without fighting it. When she saw beauty, she stopped and received it fully. When she arrived at the holy city, she didn't rush to the temple seeking something she lacked. She simply bathed in the river, sat on the ghats, and was there. Fully there for the first time in her life. She met no great master, received no profound teaching in words, but she had found what she sought, not in arriving, but in finally being present for the journey. The Buddha taught, do not dwell in the past, do not dream of the future. Concentrate the mind on the present moment. And also, the secret of health for both mind and body is not to mourn for the past, worry about the future, or anticipate troubles, but to live in the present moment wisely and earnestly. This teaching goes against everything your culture tells you, dear friend. You're told that happiness is in the future. When you graduate, when you get the job, when you find the relationship, when you make enough money, when you retire, when your children grow up, when. You're taught to delay being fully alive until conditions are right. And they're never right. There's always one more goal, one more achievement, one more thing you need before you can really relax and be present. Or you live in the past, rehashing old conversations, regretting old choices, clinging to old joys, refusing to accept that what was is gone. You miss the present because you're mentally time-traveling, existing everywhere except the only moment that actually exists. This one. Consider your own experience honestly. How often are you actually here? When you eat, are you tasting the food or thinking about what you need to do next? When you're with someone you love, are you fully present or thinking about something else? When you walk, are you experiencing the walking or lost in thought? When you breathe, do you know you're breathing? Most of your life is spent not living but thinking about life, planning it, remembering it, analyzing it, wishing it were different. This is tragic because the life you're actually living is happening right now, and you're missing it. All the peace you seek, all the joy, all the meaning, it's not waiting for you somewhere in the future when conditions are perfect. It's available now in this imperfect moment if you could just be present for it. Here is a practice. Choose one routine activity you do every day: showering, making coffee, commuting, washing dishes. For that activity, commit to being fully present, not thinking about anything else, not planning, not rehearsing, not remembering. Just experiencing the actual sensations of the activity. The temperature of the water, the smell of the coffee, the feeling of your feet on the ground, the texture of dishes under your hands. This is harder than it sounds because your mind has been trained to always be elsewhere. But this simple practice begins to train your attention back to where your life actually is. Here, now, in this moment. Rest now. Notice that you are here. Not in the past, not in the future, but here. Breathing. Existing. Notice how this moment doesn't ask anything of you except that you be present for it. Let yourself settle into the present like a bird settling onto its nest, everything you need already here. Feel how your body naturally relaxes. Notice the gentle rhythm of your breathing. Let yourself sink a little deeper into rest. You don't need to travel anywhere to find peace. It's here, in this breath, in this moment, in the soft letting go that happens when you stop seeking elsewhere and simply arrive in the only place you've ever actually been. Here, now, home. We now explore a teaching about the teacher who owned nothing, the master of empty hands. In the mountains of Thailand, in a region where monsoon mists cling to the jungle canopy and waterfalls thunder into emerald pools, there lived a forest monk named Ajahn Kun. He followed the strict tradition of his lineage. No permanent dwelling, only a cloth hung between trees as shelter, one meal a day taken before noon from whatever villagers offered, possessing only 8 requisites: 3 robes, a bowl, a razor, a needle, a belt, and a water strainer. He was 63 years old and had lived this way for 40 years, wandering the forest paths, meditating under sacred trees, teaching anyone who sought him out with genuine sincerity. A young American man named David had heard of Ajahn Kun and trekked through difficult terrain for 3 days to find him. David was 30 years old, had 2 master's degrees, worked in technology, and had every material comfort, but suffered from profound anxiety and a sense that his life, for all its success, was somehow empty. He had read everything about Buddhism, attended retreats, practiced meditation, but felt he was missing something essential that only a true master could provide. He found Ajahn Kun sitting under a Bodhi tree, so still he looked like part of the landscape. David approached nervously and bowed as he had learned to do. "Venerable teacher," David said, "I have come a long way to learn from you. I want to understand the Dharma deeply. I want to overcome my suffering and find peace. Will you accept me as your student?" Ajahn Kun opened his eyes slowly and regarded David with a gaze that seemed to see through flesh and bone to whatever lived beneath. After a long silence, he said, "What do you have to offer me?" David had prepared for this. "I have brought donations for your monastery. I have money I can give to support the Sangha. I have books I thought might be useful. I have..." Ajahn Kun held up one weathered hand. "I have no monastery. I have no use for money. I cannot read English. Your books would be kindling. What else do you have?" David felt confused. "I have my time. I have my dedication. I have my willingness to practice diligently. Time is not yours to give. It passes whether you give it or not." "Dedication to what? Practice of what? You speak of things you don't yet have as if they were yours to offer." The monk's voice was not unkind, but it was absolutely direct, like a blade cutting through fog. "Then what should I offer?" David asked, feeling something in him begin to panic at this dismantling of his prepared approach. "Show me your empty hands," Ajahn Kun said. David held out his hands, palms up. They were not empty. He held his phone in one hand, car keys in his pocket, a backpack full of supplies and books over his shoulder. And beyond that, all the invisible things he carried, his ideas about himself, his plans, his expectations, his need to achieve enlightenment, his carefully cultivated spiritual identity. "You cannot show me empty hands while holding on to everything," Ajahn Kun said. "This is why you suffer. You want to add peace to all the things you already carry." You want to acquire enlightenment like another degree to hang on your wall. You want me to give you teachings to add to all the teachings you've collected. But you're already so full there's no room for anything real to enter. What should I do? David asked. Put down your phone. Leave your backpack here. Sit down and be silent for 3 days. Don't read, don't think, don't plan, don't rehearse what you'll say to me. Just sit with the forest and see what remains when you stop filling yourself with doing and acquiring and becoming. David wanted to argue, to explain that he needed his phone for emergencies, his books for study, his plans for structure. But something in Ajahn Kun's presence made argument impossible. He set down his backpack, turned off his phone, and sat. The first day was agony. His mind screamed with boredom, with the need to do something, to be productive, to make this time count for something. He mentally rehearsed the questions he would ask the teacher, planned how he would describe this experience to friends, analyzed whether he was doing it right. His body ached from sitting. Insects bit him. Rain soaked him. He hated every minute. The second day, the screaming of his mind began to quiet, not because he had achieved some meditative state, but because he was exhausted. His mental energy depleted, he simply sat, watching rain drip from leaves, watching ants carry food, watching light change. Nothing special happened. He didn't have profound insights. He just sat, existing with nothing to add to existence. The third day, something shifted. Not dramatically, but quietly. He noticed he was breathing. He noticed he was alive. He noticed the forest was staggeringly beautiful and had been beautiful all along, but he had been too busy seeking something to notice what was already there. He noticed that sitting under a tree in the rain was just sitting under a tree in the rain, not an achievement or a failure, just what it was. He noticed his hands were empty of everything except themselves. On the fourth morning, Ajahn Kun appeared. "Now you are ready to learn," he said. "Ready? But I haven't done anything. I've just sat here." "Exactly. You've stopped doing, stopped achieving, stopped accumulating. Your hands are finally empty enough to receive." Most people come to Dharma like shoppers at a market, looking for something to acquire. They want peace, want wisdom, want enlightenment. They want. But the path is not about adding. It's about releasing, about coming to the truth with empty hands, not demanding anything, just being open to what is. David stayed in the forest for 3 months, and Ajahn Kun taught him many things. But the most important teaching had happened in those 3 days of sitting. The teaching that you cannot grasp truth, cannot possess enlightenment, cannot acquire peace. You can only create the conditions for their natural arising by letting go of the endless grasping that prevents them. When David finally left, Ajahn Kun gave him a single instruction. Wherever you go, practice empty hands. Not literally. You can use your phone, carry your possessions, but internally practice holding everything lightly. Don't grasp, don't claim, don't accumulate. Let things come and go like clouds in the sky. This is freedom. The Buddha taught, let go of what is past. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Don't try to figure anything out. Don't try to make anything happen. Relax right now and rest. And also, you only lose what you cling to. Can you feel the wisdom in this, friend? Look at your life honestly. How much suffering comes from grasping? Grasping at pleasures you want to keep. Grasping at youth that's passing. Grasping at relationships you fear losing. Grasping at status, possessions, identities. Grasping at the idea of who you think you should be. And notice that the tighter you grasp, the more painful it is when what you're grasping inevitably changes or disappears. This grasping is exhausting. Your hands are always full, always holding on to something, always trying to secure what cannot be secured. Even in your spiritual practice, you grasp. You want to acquire enlightenment, possess wisdom, achieve peace, get to some state where you finally arrived and can stop practicing. But peace doesn't come from grasping peace. It comes from releasing your grasp. This isn't a teaching about asceticism or rejecting the world. You can enjoy possessions, relationships, achievements, but enjoy them with open hands, not clenched fists. Hold them lightly, knowing they're not permanent. They're not yours to keep forever. They're just passing through your experience like everything else. The difference is enormous. Closed hands create suffering. Open hands create freedom. Here is a practice. Several times each day, physically open your hands and look at your empty palms. As you do this, ask yourself what you're currently grasping at mentally or emotionally. Are you grasping at an outcome, at being right, at controlling someone's opinion of you, at some idea of how things should be? Then, in your imagination, place whatever you're grasping into your open palm and then open your hand and let it go. Not rejecting it, not throwing it away, just releasing your grasp. Do this repeatedly, training yourself in the art of empty hands. Breathe now, and as you breathe out, practice letting go. Let go of figuring anything out, fixing anything, controlling anything. Let your hands relax, your jaw soften, your shoulders drop. Feel how much lighter you become when you stop carrying everything, when you stop grasping, when you allow your hands to be empty and therefore infinitely capable of receiving what this moment offers. Let us now turn to a teaching about the silence between words. The poet who lost her voice. In ancient Persia, in the golden age of Rumi and Hafiz, when poetry was valued more than gold and poets were advisors to kings, there lived a woman named Layla who was celebrated as one of the finest poets of her time. Her verses were sung in every marketplace, recited in every court, copied by scribes and memorized by scholars. She could capture in a single line what others needed paragraphs to express. Her metaphors were so precise, so unexpected, that they opened doorways in the mind to rooms people didn't know existed. Layla was 39 years old at the height of her powers, when a strange illness struck her. It began with a sore throat, then progressed to complete loss of voice. Healers came from far away, tried every remedy, but nothing worked. The illness passed, except for one thing. Her voice never returned. She could whisper very quietly if she tried hard, but it caused pain, and speaking above a whisper was completely impossible. For a poet who performed her work, who lived to hear the rhythm of language aloud, who thought through speaking, this was devastating. At first, she tried writing her poetry down, but it wasn't the same. The poems felt dead on paper, lacking the breath and music that had always animated them. She tried having others recite her new poems, but hearing her words in someone else's voice was almost unbearable. They never paused where she would pause, never emphasized what she meant to emphasize, never captured the subtle music she heard in her mind. She fell into deep despair. Her gift, the thing that had given her life meaning and beauty, had been taken from her. She stopped writing. She stopped going out. She sat in her garden and felt utterly empty, utterly useless. Without her voice, who was she? Without her poetry, what was the point of living? One day, a Sufi dervish came to her door. He was ancient, his face like weathered leather, his eyes holding that particular brightness of those who have seen beyond the veil. He had heard of Layla's affliction and her despair. She let him in, though she resented his presence, resented anyone who would witness her diminishment. They sat in her garden and she scribbled on paper, "I have nothing to say to you, I can't speak. I'm not who I was." The dervish read her note and smiled. "Good. Now you can learn what poetry really is." She wrote furiously, "I know what poetry is. I was one of the greatest poets in Persia. Now I'm nothing." "You knew how to make beautiful sounds," the dervish said gently. "That's not the same as poetry. Poetry is the silence between words. It's what the words point to but can never say. Your voice didn't create the poetry, it obscured it. Now, without your voice, perhaps you can finally hear what poetry truly is. She wanted to throw him out, but something in his words snagged in her heart. The dervish continued, "All your life, you've been filling the world with words. Beautiful words, yes, but still just words, just sounds in the air that arise and pass away. And in all that speaking, when did you listen? When did you sit in silence and hear what the trees are saying, what the wind is singing, what the space between heartbeats whispers?" He gestured to the garden around them. This garden is speaking poems in a language older than Persian, older than Arabic, older than any human tongue. The way light falls through leaves, that's poetry. The sound of water in the fountain, that's poetry. The space between your thoughts when you finally stop filling it with words, that's poetry. You've lost your voice. Perhaps what you've gained is ears to finally hear. Layla sat very still. For the first time in months, she stopped struggling against her condition and simply noticed where she was. She heard birds she had never noticed before, though they must have been singing all along. She saw how light created patterns on the ground that changed moment by moment. She felt a breeze touch her face with such tenderness it brought tears to her eyes. All of this had been here always, but she had been too busy composing verses about life to notice life itself. The dervish gave her an instruction. For 40 days, simply listen. Don't try to write. Don't try to speak even in whispers. Just listen with your whole body, with your whole heart. Listen to the silence beneath all sounds. Listen to what can't be spoken, and at the end of 40 days, if you still want to write poetry, write. But write from the silence, not from the need to be heard. Layla followed his instruction. She sat in her garden for hours each day, listening. At first, her mind filled the silence with constant commentary, with judgments about whether she was doing it right, with longing for her lost voice, with fear about the future. But gradually, like sediment settling in a jar of water, the mental noise began to clear. In the silence, she discovered something astonishing. The poetry had never been hers. It had always come through her, not from her. It had been there in the garden, in the light, in the space between thoughts. And she had simply learned to translate it into words. But the translation was always a reduction, always a loss. The real poetry was the wordless knowing, the direct experience, the silence that held everything. After 40 days, she did begin to write again. But the poetry was different now, spare, minimal, full of white space and implication. She would write a single line and let it stand alone, trusting that the reader would hear the silence around it. She no longer needed to perform because she was no longer performing. The poems were simply pointing at what was already there, inviting others to listen to the same silence she had discovered. Her work became more famous than ever, but she cared less about fame. She had found something more valuable than being heard. She had learned to hear. The Buddha taught, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." And also, the quieter you become, the more you can hear. But perhaps most directly, silence is the most perfect expression of scorn. No, wait, silence is the space in which all sounds arise and return, the container that gives meaning to every word. Notice, dear friend, how we fill every moment with noise, not just external noise, but the constant internal chatter of our minds. How often are you truly in silence? How often do you stop speaking, stop listening to music or podcasts or television, stop the endless mental narration and simply be quiet? Most people are terrified of silence because in silence they meet themselves, they feel what they've been avoiding, they can no longer distract themselves from what is. But silence is not empty. Silence is full. It's the space in which everything becomes clear. All the wisdom you seek is not in the words of teachers, not in the books you read, not in the podcasts you consume. It's in the silence beneath all words, the awareness that exists before thinking begins. When you're constantly filling your mind with input, with information, entertainment, conversation, even spiritual teachings, you never create the space for direct knowing to arise. Consider how much of your life is spent in noise. You wake up and immediately check your phone. You drive with radio playing. You work with music in headphones. You exercise with podcasts. You eat while watching something. You fall asleep to sounds. When do you simply exist in silence? When do you give yourself the gift of quiet, the space to hear what's beneath all the noise? This silence is not about becoming a monk or living in isolation. It's about creating moments in your regular life where you stop consuming input and simply be. Even 5 minutes of sitting in silence each morning, with no phone, no music, no words, just sitting and breathing and being, this can transform your life. In silence, you discover that you're not your thoughts, not your endless mental commentary. You discover a vast, quiet awareness that has been here all along, patiently waiting for the noise to stop. Here's a practice. Once each day, sit in silence for just 5 minutes. No music, no words, no screens, no activity. If this feels impossible, notice that resistance. What are you afraid to meet in the silence? Don't answer intellectually, just notice the fear and sit anyway. In the silence, you don't need to achieve anything, attain anything, become anything. Just be quiet and notice what's here when all the noise stops. You'll be amazed what you hear in that silence. Not words, but truth. Rest in silence now. Notice that beneath all the words you've been hearing, beneath all the thoughts in your mind, there's a vast, quiet presence. Let yourself sink into that silence like sinking into deep water. Trust that in this wordless space, healing happens, wisdom arises, peace is found. Let go of needing to understand, to figure out, to remember. Just rest in the silence that holds you. Our journey continues with a story about compassion where it's hardest to find. The soldier who forgave in Vietnam during the years of war, when the jungle burned and villages were destroyed and young men from distant countries learned what humans can do to each other. There was an American soldier named Marcus. He was 23 years old from a small town in Ohio, and he had been sent to a war he didn't understand to fight people he had never met for reasons that seemed to change depending on who was explaining them. Marcus had seen things no one should see. He had held friends as they died. He had been afraid every moment of every day for a year. He had done things in the heat of combat that he couldn't reconcile with who he thought he was. And on one particular day, during an ambush in thick jungle, he had been shot in the leg by a Viet Cong fighter, a young man probably not much older than Marcus himself. And Marcus had shot back and watched that young man fall. The wound in Marcus's leg was serious. He was evacuated, treated, eventually sent home. But the wound to his soul was deeper than any bullet could make. He returned to Ohio carrying rage that burned like acid in his chest. Rage at the enemy who had shot him. Rage at his government for sending him there. Rage at God for allowing such suffering. Rage at the universe for being a place where such things were possible. The rage kept him awake at night, made his hands shake, ruined his relationships, turned him into someone his family didn't recognize. For 20 years, he carried this rage. He drank to numb it, but the rage remained. He tried to forget, but the memories haunted him. He became isolated, bitter, poisoned by hatred for the person who had shot him. For all Viet Cong fighters, for all Vietnamese people, for everything associated with that horrible time. Then when Marcus was 43 years old, something unexpected happened. A delegation of Vietnamese monks came to the United States on a peace mission, and one of them was speaking at a nearby university. Marcus almost didn't go. Part of him wanted to stay home in his familiar misery. But something, curiosity or maybe desperation, made him attend. The monk's name was Thich Nhat Hanh, and he was perhaps 60 years old, gentle and radiant with a peace that seemed impossible given what his country had endured. He spoke of the war, of the suffering on all sides, of the young Vietnamese men who had been forced to fight, who had been terrified, who had killed and been killed, who had carried their own trauma. He spoke of seeing all beings as interconnected, of understanding that the soldier who kills and the soldier who is killed are both victims of forces larger than themselves. After the talk, during questions, Marcus stood up. His voice shook with emotion. "I was shot by one of your countrymen. He tried to kill me. How can you ask me to forgive that? How can you expect me to have compassion for someone who wanted me dead?" The audience grew silent. Thich Nhat Hanh looked at Marcus with such kindness that Marcus felt his armor crack. "Brother," the monk said softly, "the person who shot you was also suffering. He was also afraid. He was also far from home, forced to fight in a war he may not have understood. He saw you as an enemy, as a threat, not as Marcus from Ohio who has a mother who loves him and dreams of a peaceful life. You saw him as an enemy, not as a young man who also had a mother, who also had dreams, who also wanted to live. But he shot me," Marcus said, tears now running down his face. "Yes, and you shot him. You both did what you thought you had to do in that moment. You both suffered. You both carry wounds. But now, right now, you have a choice he may not have. If he died that day, he can't choose. But you're alive. You can choose to keep feeding the hatred, keep nourishing the wound, keep drinking the poison of rage and hoping it will hurt him. Or you can choose to understand that he was as trapped as you were, as afraid as you were, as human as you were. You can choose compassion." "I can't," Marcus whispered. "I've hated him for 20 years. Then you've suffered for 20 years, and he has suffered, either in death or in his own memories. Your hatred hasn't hurt him, it's only hurt you. It's poisoned you, it's stolen 20 years of your life. Don't you think you've both suffered enough? Don't you think the war has taken enough from both of you without taking the rest of your life too?" Something broke in Marcus then. He sobbed, deep, wrenching sobs that released years of locked pain. And in that release, a space opened where before there had only been solid rage. In that space, for the first time in 20 years, he could imagine the young Viet Cong fighter as a person. Could imagine him afraid, imagine him following orders, imagine him probably not wanting to be there any more than Marcus had wanted to be there. Could imagine that if they had met in different circumstances, they might have been friends. The hatred didn't disappear instantly, but the absolute solidity of it began to crack, like ice breaking up in spring. Marcus began a practice of loving-kindness meditation, sending good wishes not just to his loved ones, but to all beings, including the young man who had shot him. He said silently, "May you be peaceful. May you be free from suffering. May you be well." At first, the words felt false, impossible. But slowly, over months and years, something shifted. The rage lost its grip. The wound began to heal. Not the wound in his leg, which would always be there, but the wound in his soul. Marcus lived another 40 years until his death at 83. Those final 40 years were completely different from the previous 43. He became a peace activist. He worked with veterans suffering from PTSD. He spoke at schools about the cost of hatred and the freedom of forgiveness. He said often, "I wasted 20 years poisoning myself with hatred. Don't make my mistake. Compassion isn't weakness. It's the only thing strong enough to break the cycle of suffering." The Buddha taught, holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. And also, in separateness lies the world's greatest misery. In compassion lies the world's true strength. But perhaps most powerful is his teaching. Hatred is never ended by hatred, but by love alone. This is the eternal law. This is perhaps the hardest teaching, friend. It's relatively easy to have compassion for people who have never hurt you, for innocent victims, for those you love. But to have compassion for those who have harmed you, who have wounded you, who have acted with cruelty or ignorance or violence, this seems impossible. Your mind says, they don't deserve compassion, they deserve punishment, hatred, revenge. But notice what happens when you hold on to this hatred. Does it hurt the person you hate? Maybe, maybe not. They might not even know you hate them, might not care, might be dead and beyond caring. But it certainly hurts you. It lives in your body like a toxin, making you sick, making you bitter, stealing your peace, turning you into a smaller, harder, meaner version of yourself. You think you're protecting yourself by hating, but you're actually imprisoning yourself. This doesn't mean you condone harmful actions. It doesn't mean you trust people who have proven untrustworthy. It doesn't mean you put yourself in danger. You can have compassion for someone while also maintaining boundaries, while also holding them accountable, while also protecting yourself and others from further harm. Compassion and discernment are not opposites. What compassion means is recognizing that all beings act from their conditioning, their pain, their delusion. People who harm others are themselves suffering, themselves confused, themselves caught in cycles of pain they don't know how to break. This doesn't excuse their actions, but it helps you see them as human beings rather than as monsters, as suffering beings rather than as pure evil. And in that seeing, you free yourself from the prison of hatred. Consider who you're still angry at. Maybe it's someone who hurt you recently or someone who hurt you decades ago. Maybe it's a parent who failed you, a partner who betrayed you, a friend who abandoned you, a stranger who harmed you. That anger, how is it serving you? Is it protecting you or poisoning you? Is it justice or just ongoing suffering? What would it cost you to consider that they too were suffering, were confused, were doing the best they could with the consciousness they had at the time, however inadequate that best was? Here is a practice. Think of someone you're angry at, not the worst person, not yet. Start with something manageable. Hold an image of this person in your mind and say silently, just like me, this person wants to be happy. Just like me, this person wants to be free from suffering. Just like me, this person has known pain, fear, loss. May you be peaceful. May you be free from suffering. If these words feel false, that's okay. Keep saying them anyway. You're not saying their actions were okay. You're recognizing their humanity. You're choosing to stop poisoning yourself with hatred. Over time, this practice can transform even the deepest resentments into something softer, something that doesn't control your life. Breathe now, and as you breathe, release any hardness in your heart. Let your chest soften. Let your jaw release. Imagine breathing in peace and breathing out any bitterness you've been carrying. You don't have to forgive anyone today. But you can choose to stop feeding the hatred, to stop drinking the poison, to allow yourself the freedom that comes from putting down the burden of rage. Rest in this softness. Let yourself be held by compassion for yourself most of all. You've carried so much for so long, it's okay to put it down. It's okay to rest. Let us now turn to our final stories as we begin to bring our journey toward its gentle close. The weaver who stopped counting in a mountain village in Bhutan where prayer wheels spin in the wind and stupas mark sacred spaces. There lived a weaver named Pema. She was 58 years old and had spent her entire adult life at her loom, creating the beautiful textiles for which her region was famous. Intricate patterns passed down through generations. Colors derived from plants and minerals gathered from the mountains, each piece requiring thousands of threads and hundreds of hours. Pema had always been a perfectionist. She counted every thread, measured every dye batch precisely, followed the traditional patterns exactly. If she made even the smallest mistake, she would unweave entire sections and start again. Her textiles were considered the finest in the valley, and tourists would pay premium prices for her work. But this perfection came at a cost. Pima was exhausted, her eyes strained, her hands aching from arthritis, her soul depleted by the relentless demand for flawlessness. One winter, her granddaughter came to stay with her. The girl was 7 years old, full of energy and joy and the careless freedom of childhood. She watched Pema work for a few days, then asked if she could try weaving. Pema hesitated. Looms were expensive, materials precious, patterns sacred. But something in her granddaughter's hopeful face made her relent. The child began to weave, and it was a disaster by traditional standards. Threads went crooked, colors mixed in unexpected ways. The pattern bore only vague resemblance to what it was supposed to be. Pima watched with a mixture of horror and something else she couldn't quite name. The girl made every mistake possible, and she didn't care at all. She was absolutely delighted with her messy, imperfect creation. "Look, grandmother," she said, holding up her work. "I made this. Isn't it beautiful?" And Pima looked at it, really looked at it, and saw that it was beautiful, not despite its imperfections, but because of them. The crooked threads created unexpected textures. The wrong colors complemented each other in ways the traditional palette never achieved. The deviations from the pattern gave it life, personality, uniqueness. It was joyful in a way Pema's technically perfect work had not been joyful in decades. "Yes," Pema said quietly, "it's beautiful." Over the following weeks, something shifted in Pema. She continued her work, but when small imperfections appeared, a thread slightly off color, a pattern not quite symmetrical, she left them. At first, this required enormous effort. Her perfectionist mind screamed that she was lowering her standards, ruining her reputation, failing at her craft. But each time she allowed an imperfection to remain, something in her relaxed. She began to work faster because she wasn't constantly stopping to fix things. Her hands hurt less because she wasn't tensing with anxiety over every thread. Her eyes strained less because she wasn't examining everything with critical intensity. And surprisingly, her work became more beautiful. It gained a quality of ease, of flow, of humanity that her perfect pieces had lacked. People noticed. They said her recent work had more soul, more life, even though they couldn't articulate exactly what was different. The Buddha taught, there is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path. And also, to keep the body in good health is a duty. Otherwise, we shall not be able to keep our mind strong and clear. But what's most relevant to Pema's story is the teaching of the middle way, the string tuned neither too tight nor too loose, the path between the extremes of perfection and carelessness. How much suffering comes from perfectionism, friend? From the belief that you must get everything exactly right, that any mistake is catastrophic, that you're only valuable if you're flawless? This creates unbearable pressure, constant anxiety, and the inability to ever be satisfied with anything you do. Nothing is ever good enough because you measure it against an impossible standard. But here's the truth. Imperfection is not just acceptable, it's necessary. It's what makes things human, real, alive. The perfectly straight lines, the computer-generated patterns, the machine-made products, they lack soul precisely because they lack the human touch, which always includes slight variations, small irregularities, beautiful imperfections. This is true not just of created objects, but of yourself. You are not meant to be perfect. The wrinkles on your face, the mistakes in your past, the things you're not good at, the ways you fall short of your ideals. These are not flaws to be eliminated. They're part of your unique humanity, part of what makes you real rather than an idealized fantasy. What if you could relax your grip on perfection? What if good enough could actually be good enough? What if you could enjoy the process instead of only valuing the perfect result? What if your worth as a human being had nothing to do with being flawless? Here is a practice. Today, intentionally do something imperfectly. Send the email with a small typo. Leave a dish slightly unwashed. Let your hair be a little messy. Make something creative without trying to make it good. And notice what happens. Does the world end? Do you lose all value, or do you feel a little lighter, a little freer, a little more human? Let yourself breathe. Notice that your breath is not perfectly regular, sometimes deeper, sometimes shallower, always varying. And this irregularity is not a flaw, it's life. Let yourself be as imperfect as your breath, as inconsistent as the seasons, as varied as the clouds. Let yourself be beautifully, gloriously imperfect. Feel how your whole body softens when you release the demand for perfection. Notice the gentle rhythm of your breathing, the way your muscles naturally relax when you stop striving. You are enough right now, exactly as you are, with all your beautiful imperfections. Let yourself rest in this truth. The elder who had forgotten everything. In a care facility in modern-day Japan, where elderly residents spend their final years cared for by kind staff, there lived a woman named Yoshiko. She was 94 years old and had advanced dementia. She couldn't remember her children's names, couldn't recall her husband who had died 20 years earlier, couldn't remember what she had done an hour ago or what she was supposed to do next. The vast accumulation of her life, 94 years of experiences, relationships, achievements, losses, had largely dissolved like morning mist. The staff and visiting family members found this heartbreaking. Here was a woman who had lived a full life, who had survived war and loss, who had raised 4 children, who had been a school teacher beloved by hundreds of students, and now she retained almost nothing of it. They would show her photos of her family and she would smile politely at the strangers in the pictures. They would tell her stories of her past and she would listen as if hearing about someone else. But something remarkable was also happening. Yoshiko, freed from memory, freed from the weight of accumulated history, freed from knowing who she was supposed to be, lived entirely in the present moment with a simplicity and joy that was almost childlike. When a beam of sunlight came through the window, she would hold out her hand to catch it and marvel at the warmth. When staff brought her tea, she would savor it as if tasting tea for the first time. When someone spoke kindly to her, she would light up with gratitude, every encounter fresh and new. A Buddhist priest named Kenzo visited the facility regularly to offer services, and he began to notice Yoshiko. While other residents struggled with their diminishment, grieving their lost memories and capabilities, Yoshiko seemed at peace. He began to spend time with her, not trying to remind her of anything or restore her to who she had been, but simply being present with her as she was. One day he asked her, "Yoshiko-san, are you happy?" She looked confused by the question, as if it had never occurred to her to wonder. Then she smiled, a smile of such genuine contentment that it transformed her wrinkled face, and said, "I don't remember being unhappy." Kenzo felt something shift in his chest. "What do you worry about?" he asked. Again the confused look. "I don't remember worrying," she said, and laughed at the strangeness of the question. "What do you want?" he asked. She thought about this for a long moment. "Want? I have this cup of tea. I can see that beautiful tree outside the window. You're here and you're kind. What else would I want?" Kenzo began to understand that he was in the presence of something extraordinary. Yoshiko had arrived at a state that meditation masters spend lifetimes trying to achieve: complete presence, absolute non-attachment, freedom from the burdens of past and future. Not through practice or discipline or spiritual attainment, but through losing the very mechanisms that normally prevent such freedom. He shared this observation with Yoshiko's daughter during a visit. "Your mother has become a great teacher," he said. The daughter looked at him incredulously. But she can't remember anything. She doesn't even know who I am. Exactly, Kenzo said gently. She doesn't know who you're supposed to be, so she sees you fresh in each moment. She doesn't know who she's supposed to be, so she's free to simply be. She doesn't remember past disappointments, so she can't be bitter. She doesn't anticipate future loss, so she can't be anxious. She lives in a perpetual now that most people only glimpse in meditation. This is a kind of grace. The daughter began to cry. But she's lost so much. Has she? Kenzo asked. Or has she been freed from so much? We think identity and memory are treasures to be preserved at all costs. But maybe they're also burdens. Maybe your mother, in losing them, has been given a gift. Not a gift anyone would choose, not one I'm suggesting we should seek. But perhaps a teaching nonetheless about what happens when all the accumulation of self falls away. Yoshiko lived another 2 years, and in that time, Kenzo visited her regularly. He learned more from her than from 20 years of study. She taught him that peace doesn't require understanding, that joy doesn't require memory, that kindness doesn't require knowing who deserves it. She taught him that when everything falls away, identity, history, achievement, knowledge, what remains is still whole, still capable of experiencing wonder, still fundamentally okay. When she died, peacefully in her sleep at 96, Kenzo led her funeral service and said, "Yoshiko-san taught us that we are not our memories, not our accomplishments, not our identities. We are the awareness that experiences all of these things, and that awareness needs nothing to be complete." She showed us that even when everything we think makes us who we are is stripped away, the essential self remains, luminous and free. The Buddha taught, all conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. And also, the root of suffering is attachment. But perhaps most beautifully, you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness behind them. This story asks difficult questions, friend. What are you but your memories, your history, your accumulated experience? And yet, consider, if all of that fell away, would you cease to exist? Or would something remain? The simple awareness that is experiencing these words right now, that has been here through every moment of your life, unchanged by all the changes, witnessing everything but not defined by what it witnesses. We spend so much energy trying to build and maintain a solid self, accumulating experiences to define us, collecting achievements to prove our worth, clinging to relationships to give us identity, holding on to memories to anchor us in time. And all of this effort creates a false sense of security because everything we're clinging to is impermanent. Every memory will fade, every achievement will be forgotten, every relationship will end either in separation or death. If you base your sense of self on these things, you live in constant anxiety about losing them. But what if your essential self is not this accumulated stuff? What if you are the awareness that experiences all of it but is not changed by any of it? The awareness that was here when you were 5 years old and is still here now. The awareness that will be here tomorrow. The awareness that doesn't need you to be successful or attractive or accomplished or even remembered to be fundamentally whole and okay. This is liberation, not from having experiences but from identifying with them so completely that you think you are them. You can enjoy memories without needing them to define you. You can appreciate achievements without basing your worth on them. You can love people deeply without needing them to complete you. Because you are already complete, already whole, already exactly what you need to be. Here is a practice to touch this truth. Sit quietly and ask yourself, what remains when I stop identifying with my thoughts, my memories, my roles, my achievements? Don't answer intellectually. Just notice what's here when you stop all the mental activity of being someone. Notice the simple awareness that's present. That awareness doesn't have a name, doesn't have a history, doesn't need to prove anything. It just is. And in touching that, you touch something that can never be lost, never diminished, never threatened. You touch your true nature. Rest now in that awareness. You don't need to remember anything, achieve anything, become anything. You are already everything you need to be. The awareness that is experiencing this moment is complete, whole, perfect as it is. Let everything else fall away and rest in that simple being. Let us continue with another story about the nature of time and presence. The clockmaker who stopped time in the ancient city of Prague, where cobblestone streets wind between Gothic spires and the Vltava river flows with the weight of centuries, there lived a clockmaker named Victor. He was 62 years old with hands that trembled slightly now but still possessed the delicate precision required to adjust the finest mechanisms. His workshop occupied a narrow building in the old town, where the famous astronomical clock had marked the hours for 600 years. Victor had dedicated his entire life to the measurement of time, to its capture and display, to the intricate dance of gears and springs that translated the universe's rotation into neat, countable segments. His workshop was filled with clocks of every kind, grandfather clocks with deep, resonant chimes, delicate pocket watches no larger than a coin, cuckoo clocks from the Black Forest, digital displays from Japan, sundials from ancient Rome. The constant ticking surrounded him like rain, like heartbeats, like the inescapable pulse of existence itself. Victor knew time intimately. He could hear when a mechanism was running fast or slow by a fraction of a second. He could feel the quality of time passing in his bones. Yet for all his mastery, Victor was haunted by time. He counted it obsessively. He measured how long tasks took, how many hours remained until deadlines, how many years he likely had left to live. He calculated the time wasted in his youth, the time squandered on regrets, the time that slipped through his fingers like water no matter how carefully he tried to hold it. Time was his profession and his prison. The more precisely he measured it, the faster it seemed to flee. One autumn afternoon, a Buddhist monk from Tibet arrived at Victor's shop. The monk had traveled far to commission a special clock, not for himself, but for his monastery in the Himalayas, where the marking of time for meditation and prayers required great precision. His name was Tenzin, and his face held the weathered peace of high mountains and long silences. Victor showed him various mechanisms, explaining the merits of each. Tenzin listened patiently, then asked a question that stopped Victor mid-sentence. "Why do you measure time?" Victor blinked. "To know when things happen, to schedule, to plan, to coordinate. But does knowing when things happen help you experience them more fully?" Victor paused. He had never considered this. "I suppose it helps me manage my life." "Does it?" Tenzin asked gently. "Or does it fragment your life into countless tiny pieces, each one inadequate, each one slipping away before you can truly inhabit it?" Victor felt something tighten in his chest. "Time passes whether I measure it or not." "Does it?" Tenzin looked around the workshop at all the ticking clocks. What if time is not something that passes, but something that is? What if each moment is not a segment on a line, rushing toward the past, but a door opening into eternity? What if the very act of measuring time is what makes it seem to flee? Victor didn't understand, but something in him wanted to. "I don't know any other way to relate to time," he admitted. Tenzin smiled. "May I show you something?" He reached into his robes and pulled out a small object, a Tibetan singing bowl, bronze and ancient, its surface worn smooth by countless hands. He placed it on Victor's workbench and struck it with a wooden mallet. A tone emerged, pure and penetrating, filling the workshop, seeming to stop the ticking of every clock. "Listen," Tenzin said. Don't wait for the sound to end. Don't measure how long it lasts. Simply be with the sound. Victor listened. The tone sustained, rich with overtones vibrating in his chest. He noticed his mind wanting to clock it, to count the seconds, to anticipate its fading. But Tenzin's instruction held him. He let the counting go. He simply listened, and something extraordinary happened. As Victor stopped measuring the sound's duration, the sound seemed to expand. It became vast, oceanic, containing worlds. The moment stretched not in measured time, but in depth, in presence, in quality. He was not hearing a sound that would end. He was inside the sound, and the sound was everywhere, and there was no before or after, only this. When the tone finally faded into silence, Victor realized he had no idea how long it had lasted. A few seconds? Several minutes? It didn't matter. What mattered was that for that duration, whatever it was, he had not been a clockmaker counting time. He had been pure awareness, fully present, timeless. Time is not your enemy, Tenzin said quietly. Your measurement of it is. The clock tells you that this moment is just like every other moment, 60 seconds long, divisible into smaller units, equivalent to the moment before and the moment after. But this moment is not like any other moment. This moment contains your entire life. This moment is the only place you can ever be. When you measure it, you miss it. When you inhabit it, it becomes infinite. Victor ordered no clock that day. Instead, he asked Tenzin to teach him. Over the following weeks, before the monk returned to Tibet, Victor learned to sit in meditation, to watch his breath, to notice his mind's compulsive measuring and let it go. He learned that presence expands time in a way that measurement contracts it. He learned that a single breath, fully experienced, contains more than 100 years of distracted living. When Tenzin left, Victor made a radical change. He removed all but one clock from his workshop, a simple wall clock that told him the hour when he needed to meet appointments. The constant ticking stopped. In the silence, Victor discovered something he had never known. He had more time now, not less. Without the constant reminder of time's passage, without the perpetual counting, the hours seemed to deepen. His work improved because he was fully present with each mechanism. His meals became satisfying because he was actually tasting them. His conversations grew richer because he was actually listening, rather than calculating how long they would last. He still measured time when necessary. You cannot run a clockmaker's shop without schedules. But he stopped living inside measurement. He stopped treating time as a resource to be managed and started treating each moment as a gift to be unwrapped. He discovered that time, like attention, expands to fill whatever space you give it. Give it a cramped space of anxious measurement, and it shrinks to almost nothing. Give it the vast space of presence, and it becomes inexhaustible. Victor lived another 20 years, and those years contained more life than his previous 60. On his deathbed, when a friend asked if he regretted anything, Victor smiled and said, "I regret every moment I spent measuring life instead of living it. But I don't regret a single moment I spent fully present. And in the end, those are the only moments that were real." The Buddha taught, "The trouble is you think you have time." But he also taught, "Each morning we are born again. What we do today matters most." These teachings seem contradictory until you realize they point to the same truth. Time is not a quantity to be hoarded or spent. It is a quality to be entered, a depth to be discovered, a presence to be embodied. Notice, dear friend, how much of your life is spent in the anxiety of time. You hurry through the morning to save time for the afternoon. You rush through the week to earn the weekend. You work through the years to afford retirement. And all this saving and earning and affording for some future moment. When does that moment arrive? It arrives as now, always as now. And if you haven't learned to be present now, you won't be present then either. The future, when it comes, will be just another now that you're hurrying through to get to some other future. This is the great trap. We sacrifice the present moment on the altar of future moments, not realizing that all we will ever have is present moments. The future never comes as future, it only comes as now. So if you cannot be at peace now, you will never be at peace. If you cannot find joy now, you will never find joy. If you cannot be present now, presence will always be somewhere else, some other time, perpetually out of reach. Here is a practice. Set aside your measurements for just 1 hour today. Take off your watch, turn away from clocks, let time be whatever it is. During this hour, do whatever you do, but do it without checking how long it takes, without scheduling the next thing, without dividing the hour into productive and unproductive segments. Simply be with what you're doing. You'll likely feel anxious at first. We're so conditioned to measure that measurement feels like safety. But stay with it. Notice what happens when you stop fragmenting time into countable units. Notice how the hour might seem to stretch, how activities might become more vivid, how presence might deepen when you're not constantly checking how much time has passed. Breathe now, and as you breathe, let go of the clock. This breath is not one breath among many to be counted. This breath is the only breath there is. Let it be complete. Let it be enough. Let it contain your whole life, because it does. The past is a memory appearing now. The future is an imagination appearing now. Only now is real, and now is not a measurement. Now is an invitation to be fully here. Let us now explore a teaching about the nature of difficulty and grace. The potter who embraced the crack in the mountains of rural Korea, where mist clings to ancient pines and the soil holds the memory of countless generations, there lived a potter named Sun-yi. She was 70 years old and had worked with clay since she was a child, learning from her grandmother who had learned from her grandmother in a lineage stretching back 500 years. Her pottery was famous throughout Korea, simple, elegant vessels that seemed to hold the very essence of Korean aesthetics. Functional beauty, humble nobility, the refinement of simplicity. Sun-yi's specialty was the traditional moon jar, a large round vessel meant to represent the full moon. Creating a perfect moon jar was extraordinarily difficult. The clay had to be of precise consistency. The wheel had to turn at exactly the right speed. The potter's hands had to move with perfect symmetry. And most challenging of all, the jar was too large to throw in one piece. It required throwing two halves separately and joining them while still wet, then shaping them into a single seamless sphere. Few potters could create a truly perfect moon jar, and Sun-yi could. Her jars were collected by museums and wealthy patrons. They sold for considerable sums. She was considered a living national treasure. One autumn, Sun-yi was working on the most important commission of her career, a moon jar for the National Museum to be displayed as the centerpiece of a new exhibition on Korean ceramics. She had spent weeks preparing the clay, days centering herself through meditation, and finally sat at her wheel to create the masterpiece. The throwing went perfectly. The joining was flawless. The shaping achieved a roundness that seemed to contain the night sky itself. She had never made a more beautiful jar. She placed it carefully in her kiln, said the prayers her grandmother had taught her, and began the firing that would take 3 days and nights. On the second night, something went wrong. A crack in the kiln wall allowed a draft to enter, creating uneven heat. Sun-yi didn't discover this until she opened the kiln on the third day and found her masterpiece ruined. A large crack ran down one side of the jar, a fault line that transformed the perfect sphere into something broken, something that could never be displayed in the National Museum, something that represented not mastery but failure. Sun-yi wept. not just for the lost commission, but for everything the crack represented. The impermanence of achievement, the fragility of mastery, the way a lifetime of skill can be undone by a single draft of wind. She had devoted her life to perfection, and here was imperfection, irreversible and absolute. She considered smashing the jar entirely, returning the clay to the earth, erasing the evidence of her failure, but she didn't smash it. Instead, she placed it on a shelf in her workshop and lived with it. Day after day, she sat at her wheel working on other pieces, and the cracked jar watched her. At first, it felt like an accusation, a constant reminder of her failure. But gradually something shifted. She began to notice that the crack was not ugly. It wandered down the side of the jar like a dry riverbed, like a path through mountains, like a line drawn by lightning. It caught the light differently than the smooth surface, creating shadows and depths that the perfect jar would not have had. The crack made the jar unique. There was no other jar in the world exactly like it. Moreover, the crack made the jar honest. A perfect jar says, "Look how skilled the potter is." The cracked jar says, "Look how vulnerable all things are. Look how beauty and breakage live together. Look how the attempt at perfection meets the truth of impermanence." Sunyi began to meditate on the crack, to see it not as a failure but as a teaching. The crack was not something that had happened to the jar. The crack was part of the jar, as essential to its being as the curve of its walls. Without the crack, it would have been beautiful. With the crack, it was true. She thought of her own life, the losses she had suffered, the disappointments, the ways her plans had cracked and broken. She had always seen these as failures, as deviations from the perfect life she should have lived. But what if they were not failures? What if they were the very things that made her life real, that made her human, that allowed others to see not her perfection but her shared vulnerability? When the museum director came to see the ruined jar, prepared to discuss the commission's failure, Sunyi surprised him. "This is the jar I want you to display," she said. He was confused. "But it's cracked. It's ruined." "No," she said. "It's completed. A perfect jar shows skill. This jar shows truth. Life is not perfect. Beauty is not separate from brokenness. This is what Korean aesthetics has always understood. The beauty of things as they are, not as we wish they were. Display this jar and people will see not just a potter's hands, but their own cracked and beautiful lives." The director was skeptical, but something in Sunyi's certainty moved him. The jar was displayed, crack and all, and something remarkable happened. Visitors stood before it longer than before any other piece in the museum. Something in the crack spoke to them, touched something in their own broken places. A perfect jar they would have admired and forgotten. The cracked jar they remembered because it was them, because they too were cracked and beautiful, broken and whole. The Buddha taught that suffering comes from attachment to how things should be rather than acceptance of how things are. The Japanese have a practice called kintsugi, repairing broken pottery with gold, making the cracks visible and honored rather than hidden. The Korean aesthetic of wabi-sabi embraces the beauty of imperfection, impermanence, and incompleteness. All of these teachings point to the same truth. Our cracks are not our shame. They are our humanity. Consider, dear friend, the cracks in your own life, the relationships that didn't work out, the dreams that shattered, the failures, the losses, the ways you've been broken by life's uneven heat. You've probably tried to hide these cracks, to present a smooth and perfect surface to the world, to pretend you haven't been damaged. But the cracks are visible anyway, and the effort to hide them is exhausting. What if you could embrace your cracks the way Sunyi embraced hers? Not with resignation or defeat, but with recognition that your cracks are part of what makes you real, part of what allows others to see themselves in you, part of what transforms you from a perfect statue into a living, breathing, beautifully imperfect human being. This is not about celebrating damage or seeking brokenness. It's about recognizing that in this impermanent world, everything cracks eventually. The question is not whether we will be broken, but how we will hold our brokenness. Will we hide it in shame? Or will we let it be seen? Let it be honored? Let it become part of our beauty? Here is a practice. Think of something in your life that feels like a crack, a failure, a flaw. Maybe it's something that happened to you, maybe something you did. Instead of hiding it or fighting it or wishing it away, simply sit with it. Look at it the way Sunyi looked at her cracked jar. Ask yourself, what does this crack teach me? How has this brokenness made me more human? Who else might see their own struggles in my cracks? You don't have to share your cracks with everyone, but see if you can stop being ashamed of them. See if you can start to see them as part of your unique and unrepeatable beauty. Breathe now and feel your own wholeness, a wholeness that includes everything, the smooth surfaces and the cracks, the achievements and the failures, the light and the shadow. You are not perfect, and you don't need to be. You are complete, crack and all. Let yourself rest in that completeness. Let us continue with a story about finding peace in the midst of chaos. The musician who played through the storm. In a small coastal village in Japan where fishing boats rocked in harbors and the smell of salt permeated everything, there lived a shakuhachi player named Haruki. He was 55 years old and had devoted his life to this ancient bamboo flute whose haunting sound was said to be the voice of the wind itself. He had studied for decades with masters, had achieved a level of proficiency that drew students from across Asia, and had found in the shakuhachi not just a musical instrument but a spiritual practice, a way of breathing, a path to presence. Haruki lived simply. His house was small, furnished only with essentials, a sleeping mat, a low table, cushions, and of course his collection of shakuhachi, each one different, each one with its own voice. He taught a few students, performed occasionally at temples and retreats, and spent most of his time in what he called playing practice. Sitting in meditation and then playing whatever arose, letting the music be an expression of his state rather than a performance for others. One September, a powerful typhoon approached the coast. The villagers boarded up their windows, secured their boats, and prepared for the worst. Haruki did the same, but when night fell and the storm began to rage, when the wind howled like a wounded animal and rain hammered the roof like 10,000 fists, something moved in him. He took out his shakuhachi, sat in the center of his small house, and began to play. The sound was swallowed by the storm. The wind was so loud that even Haruki could barely hear his own notes. The rain drowned out all subtlety. It seemed pointless, absurd even, playing beautiful music that no one, including himself, could properly hear. But Haruki continued. He didn't play against the storm, trying to overpower it with volume. He played with the storm, letting the wind's howl become part of his music, letting the rain's rhythm become his rhythm, letting the chaos outside enter his breath and emerge as something transformed. Hour after hour through the long night he played. His lips grew tired, his breath grew ragged, but still he played. He entered a state he had never experienced before, a state where the boundary between himself and the storm dissolved, where his exhale was the wind and the wind was his exhale, where there was no musician and no instrument and no music, just one vast, roaring, breathing presence. When dawn came and the typhoon passed, when the sun rose over a village battered but surviving, Haruki set down his shakuhachi and realized he had undergone a transformation. For years he had sought peace through stillness, through quiet, through removing himself from disturbance. He had thought that spiritual practice required calm circumstances. That presence was only possible when conditions were favorable. But through the night of the typhoon, he had discovered something different. presence was possible anywhere. Peace was available not just in the absence of chaos, but in the very midst of it. The storm had not interrupted his practice. The storm had become his practice. A student visited him a few days later and asked about the experience. Haruki thought for a long time before answering. "All my life," he said, "I thought I needed to find the eye of the storm, the calm center around which everything whirls. I sought out quiet places, silent retreats, circumstances where I could hear myself think. And there is value in that. But the storm taught me something else. The eye of the storm is not a place, it is a way of being. I can carry the eye with me wherever I go. In the midst of the loudest chaos, if I am truly present, there is stillness. The stillness is not the absence of sound. The stillness is what hears the sound. The stillness is not the absence of chaos. The stillness is what remains unshaken while chaos rages." He picked up his shakuhachi and played a few notes, soft, almost inaudible in the quiet room. "When I play now," he said, "I play not just with my breath, but with the wind's breath, with the world's breath. The storm is always here in some form. Noise, difficulty, challenge, chaos. And the stillness is always here too. They are not opposites, they are dance partners. The storm gives the stillness something to hold. The stillness gives the storm a place to rest. The Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. And also, you will not be punished for your anger, you will be punished by your anger. But perhaps most relevant here is the teaching of the lotus, which grows not in spite of the mud, but because of it, drawing nourishment from the very darkness that surrounds it to bloom in pristine beauty above the water. Consider your own life, friend. How much energy do you spend trying to arrange circumstances so that you can be at peace? You need the right environment, the right mood, the right amount of sleep, the right response from others. You're peaceful when things go well and disturbed when they don't. Your peace is hostage to conditions that are constantly changing and largely beyond your control. But what if peace could be unconditional? What if you could find stillness not just in quiet rooms but in noisy offices, not just on retreat but in traffic? Not just when things go well but when everything falls apart? This is not about suppressing your reactions or pretending difficulty doesn't affect you. It's about discovering that deeper than your reactions, deeper than your emotions, deeper than all your responses to conditions, there is an awareness that remains present, available still. This awareness is what Haruki discovered during the typhoon. The storm was real, the chaos was real, his exhaustion and fear were real, but something else was also real. The awareness that witnessed all of this, that could play music in the midst of it, that remained unchanged while everything around it changed. This awareness is always available to you, in every moment, in every circumstance. It doesn't require special conditions. It is the condition in which all conditions appear. Here is a practice. The next time you find yourself in chaos, noise, conflict, pressure, overwhelm, instead of fighting to change the circumstances, pause and notice the awareness that is experiencing the chaos. The chaos is happening in awareness. Awareness is not happening in chaos. See if you can rest in that awareness even briefly while the storm rages on. You don't have to like the storm. You don't have to pretend it's not difficult. But you can discover that you are larger than the storm, that something in you remains untouched even as everything else is affected. This is where true peace lives, not in the absence of storms, but in the stillness that contains them. Breathe now, and know that this breath is happening in stillness. Your heartbeat is happening in stillness. Whatever sounds reach your ears are happening in stillness. The stillness is not somewhere else waiting for conditions to be right. The stillness is here, now, always, holding everything. Let yourself rest in that stillness. Let us now explore a teaching about the connection between all beings. the healer who received in a village in ancient India. Near the great river Ganges, there lived a woman named Devaki, who was known throughout the region as a healer. She was 43 years old, with calloused hands and tired eyes that nonetheless sparkled with kindness. From morning until night, she tended to the sick and wounded who came to her door, setting broken bones, preparing herbal remedies, sitting with the dying, comforting the grieving. She asked for nothing in return except what people could freely give, and often she accepted nothing at all, healing the poorest villagers without payment, giving away her own food when others were hungry. Devaki was beloved, but she was also exhausted. For 20 years she had given and given and given, and now her reserves were depleted. She slept poorly, ate poorly, and had begun to feel a growing emptiness inside her that no amount of giving seemed to fill. She still felt the deep pull to help others, but helping had become mechanical, joyless, drained of the love that had once filled it. One evening, a wandering sadhu, a holy man who had renounced everything, appeared at her door. He was ancient, his body thin as a bamboo stalk, his eyes bright with that particular fire that burns in those who have seen beyond the veil. He didn't ask for healing. He simply looked at her and said, "You are dying." Devaki was startled. She hadn't told anyone about the pain in her chest, the weakness in her limbs, the sense that her life force was draining away. "How do you know?" "I can see it," the sadhu said. "You have given everything and received nothing. You have emptied yourself without being refilled. You think giving is holy and receiving is selfish, but you are wrong. A well that only pours out eventually runs dry. A fire that is never fed eventually burns out. You are dying of generosity." "But receiving feels wrong," Devaki protested. "People give to me out of obligation or guilt. They have so little. I don't want to take from them." The sadhu shook his head. "You don't understand. When you refuse to receive, you break the circle. You prevent the givers from completing their gift. You deny them the blessing of generosity. You make yourself superior. The one who gives but never needs. This is not humility. This is pride, dressed in humble clothing." Devaki felt something crack inside her. She had never thought of it this way. Her refusal to receive, which she had always considered selfless, was actually a form of separation, of keeping herself apart, of placing herself above the cycle of mutual exchange that connects all beings. "What should I do?" she asked. "Tomorrow," the sadhu said. "Instead of healing, let yourself be healed. Instead of giving, receive. When people bring you offerings, accept them with gratitude. When they offer help, say yes. When they express love, let it in. For one day, practice receiving as you have practiced giving, fully, openly, without resistance. And see what happens." Devaki followed his instruction, though it was the hardest thing she had ever done. When a farmer brought her vegetables from his garden, instead of protesting that he needed them more, she said simply, "Thank you." When a child offered to sweep her floor, instead of saying it wasn't necessary, she smiled and let the child work. When an old woman she had healed years ago came to sit with her and told her how much Devaki had meant to her life, instead of deflecting the praise, Devaki listened, really listened, and let the words penetrate. By evening, she was weeping, not from sadness but from an overwhelming fullness. She realized she had been starving, not for food but for connection, for the other half of the circle, for the receiving that makes giving complete. All these years she had experienced the joy of giving but had denied herself and others the joy of receiving. She had broken the sacred exchange that weaves all beings together. Something else happened too. By receiving, she found she had more to give. The well began to refill. The fire received fuel. Her healing work, when she returned to it the next day, had a different quality. Softer, more connected, more mutual. She wasn't just giving to patients anymore. She was exchanging with them, receiving their trust, their vulnerability, their humanity, even as she offered her skills and care. The sadhu returned a week later. "Better," he said, looking at her. "The color has returned to your soul. But remember, this is not a one-time lesson. Every day practice receiving. Let life give to you. Let the sun warm you without apologizing for taking its light. Let the rain nourish you without guilt over using water. Let love reach you without deflecting it. You are not separate from the flow of giving and receiving that moves through all things. You are part of it. To deny receiving is to deny your place in the web of existence." The Buddha taught, "Thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." But he also taught about interdependence, that all things arise together, support each other, give and receive in endless cycles. The lotus receives nourishment from the mud. The mud receives beauty from the lotus. Nothing exists alone. Consider, friend, how you relate to receiving. Do you deflect compliments? Do you refuse help when it's offered? Do you feel guilty when good things come to you? Do you insist on giving more than you take? This pattern, which looks like humility, is actually a wall. It keeps you separate, keeps you in the role of giver, keeps you from experiencing the full circle of connection. Receiving is not selfish. Receiving is essential. When you receive gracefully, you complete the gift. You honor the giver. You acknowledge your interdependence with all beings. You take your proper place in the web of existence, not as one who stands apart, but as one who is woven into the fabric of mutual exchange. Moreover, receiving replenishes you. If you only give, you deplete yourself. If you only take, you burden others. But in the dance of giving and receiving, energy flows, circulates, renews. The water doesn't stay in the well, but neither does the well run dry, because rain falls and rivers flow and the great cycle continues. Here is a practice. For one day or even 1 hour, practice receiving. When someone compliments you, simply say thank you. Don't deflect, don't argue, don't reciprocate immediately. When someone offers help, accept it, even if you could do it yourself. When good things happen, let yourself enjoy them without guilt. Notice how difficult this might be. Notice what stories arise that you don't deserve it, that others need it more, that receiving is weak or selfish. These stories are not truth. They are habits that keep you isolated, depleted, unable to fully participate in the great exchange of life. Breathe now and receive this breath. You didn't make the air. It was given to you by trees and oceans and the great cycle of the atmosphere. Let yourself receive it fully, gratefully. Let the earth support you. Receive that support without trying to earn it. Let whatever goodness exists in this moment reach you. You are worthy of receiving simply because you exist. Let that be enough. Let us continue with another story of wisdom found in unexpected places. The child who taught the master in ancient China, during the time when great Buddhist monasteries dotted the mountains and valleys. There lived a renowned master named Wu Ji. He was 80 years old and had spent 60 of those years in intensive practice. His understanding was vast, his peace was legendary, and students traveled from distant lands to sit at his feet. He had seen through the illusion of self, had experienced states of consciousness beyond description, and had guided hundreds of seekers toward awakening. He thought he had learned everything that could be learned. One spring afternoon, a village woman came to the monastery gates with her daughter, a girl of 7 years old. The mother was troubled. Her daughter spoke strangely, saw things others couldn't see, and was considered odd by the village. She had brought the girl hoping the master could tell her if something was wrong with the child. The master agreed to meet with them. He expected to see a disturbed child, perhaps one of those rare beings born with some spiritual opening that needed guidance. or perhaps simply a child with mental difficulties that presented as spiritual insight. What he found surprised him. The girl, whose name was Mei Ling, sat perfectly still before him, her eyes clear and present in a way he recognized from years of meditation. She wasn't nervous or awed by his presence. She simply was. "Mei Ling," the master said gently, "your mother says you see things others don't see. What do you see?" The girl considered the question with the seriousness of a philosopher. "I see what's there," she said. "I see that the tree outside the window isn't just a tree. It's also the rain that fed it, and the sun that grew it, and the earth that holds it, and the bird that sits on it, and the person who planted it, and everyone who will ever look at it. It's not one thing. It's everything pretending to be one thing." The master felt something shift in his chest. This was not confused rambling. This was direct perception of interdependence, described with the simplicity of a child who had no spiritual vocabulary to dress it up. "What else do you see?" he asked. "I see that nobody is real the way they think they are. My mother thinks she's a separate person with a beginning when she was born and an ending when she'll die. But I can see she's made of everything, of her parents and their parents and the food she's eaten and the air she's breathed and everyone she's ever met and everything she's ever thought. She doesn't end at her skin. She goes on forever in all directions. She just doesn't remember." The master was silent. He had spent 60 years arriving at understanding that this child articulated naturally, effortlessly, without any practice at all. "Do the other children see what you see?" he asked. "No," Mei Ling said, and for the first time a shadow of sadness crossed her face. "They see separate things. They think the tree is just a tree and their mother is just their mother and they are just themselves. It makes them feel alone. It makes them fight over things because they think things can be owned by a separate self. It makes them afraid of dying because they think dying ends something that never started. I wish they could see what I see. It's not scary, it's beautiful." The master bowed to the child, not the formal bow of a teacher to a student, but the deep bow of recognition. "Mei Ling," he said, "there is nothing wrong with you. You see clearly what most people spend lifetimes learning to see and many never see at all. The problem is not your vision. The problem is that you live among people who have forgotten how to see." He turned to the mother. "Your daughter is not ill, she is awake. Do not try to make her see the way others see. Protect her vision. Let her speak what she sees. Some will think her strange, but others will recognize truth and be transformed by it. She is a gift, not a problem." After they left, the master sat in meditation for many hours. Something had cracked open in him, not a new understanding, but a reminder. He had become so sophisticated in his practice, so elaborate in his conceptual frameworks, so proud of his hard-won realizations that he had forgotten the simplicity that Mei Ling embodied. She didn't practice seeing interdependence, she just saw it. She didn't meditate to dissolve the illusion of self. She simply didn't create the illusion in the first place. He realized that somewhere in his 60 years of practice, he had become attached to practice itself, attached to the identity of being a spiritual master, attached to the complexity of awakening. And a 7-year-old girl had reminded him that awakening is not complex at all. It is the simplest thing in the world. So simple that we complicate it with techniques and teachings and decades of effort when it has been here all along, waiting for us to simply notice. The Buddha taught, "If you want to know how to pass through life without suffering, listen to those who have not yet learned how to create suffering." He also said, "Unless you become like little children, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." Every wisdom tradition recognizes that children, before they are taught to see separation, often see wholeness. Before they learn to be selves, they are seamlessly part of everything. Before they accumulate fears and concepts and identities, they are simply present. We don't need to become children again, friend. We can't unlearn everything we've learned, but we can remember what we knew before we learned so much. We can touch the simplicity that precedes complexity. We can let go of spiritual sophistication and rest in immediate presence. Notice how complicated you've made awakening, how many books you've read, how many techniques you've tried, how many concepts you've accumulated about enlightenment. None of this is wrong, but all of it can become a barrier. The very effort to wake up can keep you asleep because it implies you're not already awake, implies there's somewhere to get to, something to achieve, some state other than this one. What if you saw, like Mei Ling, that the tree outside is everything pretending to be one thing? What if you recognized right now that you don't end at your skin, that you go on forever in all directions, that you're made of everything and everyone? This is not a spiritual achievement. This is simply what's true. You have always been interconnected. You have never been separate. You have nothing to attain and nowhere to arrive because you have never left. Here is a practice. For a few moments, see the way a child sees. Look at something simple, a cup, a plant, your hand. Instead of seeing an object with a name and a function, see it as Mei Ling might. See the history in it, the materials it's made of, the processes that shaped it, the hands that crafted it, the elements that comprise it. See how it connects to everything else, how nothing exists in isolation, how each thing is a meeting point of infinite causes and conditions. You don't have to learn this, you just have to notice it. It's always been true. Breathe now and feel your connection to everything that breathes. The air you inhale has been breathed by countless beings. The oxygen in it was made by plants who drew it from sunlight. The sunlight came from a star that was born in the death of another star. You are breathing the universe. You are the universe breathing. Let this not be a concept but a felt sense, as simple and obvious as a child's natural wisdom. Let us explore one more story before we begin to bring our journey to its gentle close. The gardener who let the garden grow. In a Buddhist monastery in the mountains of Vietnam, there was a garden that had been tended for 300 years. Generations of monks had cared for it, shaping the trees, trimming the hedges, arranging the stones, creating a landscape that was considered one of the most beautiful examples of contemplative garden design in all of Asia. Visitors came from far away to walk its paths, to sit by its pond, to experience the peace that seemed to emanate from every carefully placed element. The gardener responsible for maintaining this legacy was named Thầy Duc. He was 67 years old and had cared for the garden for 40 years, following in the footsteps of his teacher before him. He knew every plant, every stone, every subtlety of the landscape. He understood how the light fell at different times of day and different seasons, how water flowed through the terrain, how growth had to be constantly managed to maintain the garden's intended form. Thầy Duc was a perfectionist. He spent hours each day trimming, adjusting, correcting. If a branch grew in an unexpected direction, he redirected it. If a plant seeded itself where it shouldn't be, he removed it. If moss appeared on the wrong stone, he scraped it away. The garden was beautiful, but it was beautiful in the way a portrait is beautiful. A fixed image maintained against the constant pressure of change. One year, Thầy Duc fell ill. A fever kept him in bed for weeks, and when he finally recovered, he was too weak to work. The other monks were busy with their own duties, and the garden was left untended for nearly 3 months. When Thầy Duc finally returned to his garden, he expected to find chaos. Instead, he found something that stopped him in his tracks. The garden had changed. Branches had grown in unexpected directions, creating new shapes. Plants had seeded themselves in unplanned places, creating new relationships between species. Moss had spread over stones in ways that softened their edges. The pond had accumulated fallen leaves that had partly decomposed, creating a dark, rich surface that reflected the sky differently. Nothing was as he had maintained it, and nothing was wrong. More than not wrong, something was more alive. The garden he had kept for 40 years was beautiful but static, a human idea imposed on nature. The garden that had grown for 3 months without his interference was wilder, less controlled, and somehow more honest. It wasn't trying to be anything. It just was what it was. And that was beautiful in a way that all his careful maintenance had never achieved. Duke sat down on a bench he himself had placed 30 years ago and wept. For 40 years, he thought, I've been fighting the garden, forcing it to match my vision, preventing it from becoming what it wanted to become. I thought I was serving the garden, but I was dominating it. I thought I was caring for it, but I was controlling it. He thought of his own life, how much energy he had spent trying to shape it according to plans, resisting unexpected developments, fighting against changes that came unbidden. He had treated his life the way he had treated the garden, and in both cases he had exhausted himself maintaining an image rather than allowing a life. Over the following years, Duke gardened differently. He still cared for the garden, removing truly invasive species, ensuring the paths remained walkable, tending to genuine problems. But he stopped fighting growth, stopped imposing his vision, stopped trying to freeze the garden in an imagined perfect state. He let branches grow where they wanted to grow. He let plants seed where they wanted to seed. He let moss spread as moss will spread. He became less a sculptor and more a collaborator, less a controller and more a witness. The garden changed. Some visitors who had loved its previous formal beauty were disappointed. But more visitors found something in the wilder garden that the formal garden had lacked. They felt less like they were in a museum and more like they were in a living world. The garden's imperfection made space for their own imperfection. Its wildness gave them permission for their own wildness. Its collaboration with nature modeled a way of living that all of them somehow had forgotten. The Buddha taught, you cannot travel the path until you become the path itself. And also, all that we are is the result of what we have thought. But perhaps most relevant here is the teaching of letting go, not as passive resignation, but as active non-interference, trusting life to unfold as it unfolds, trusting that the universe knows how to be a universe without our constant correction. How much of your life, friend, is spent gardening in the old way, constantly trimming, adjusting, controlling? You try to shape your career according to a plan. You try to shape your relationships according to an image. You try to shape yourself according to an ideal. And all this shaping exhausts you because life keeps growing in unexpected directions, keeps seeding itself in unplanned places, keeps moss spreading and leaf falling and wildly becoming what it is becoming, regardless of your preferences. What if you could garden differently? What if you could tend to genuine problems without fighting natural growth? What if you could care without controlling, nurture without dominating, participate without imposing? This doesn't mean abandoning all intention or becoming passive. Duke still removed invasive species, still maintained the paths. But he stopped trying to freeze the garden in an imagined perfection, stopped fighting the garden's own nature. You can care for your life without controlling it. You can have intentions without demanding that reality conform to them. You can tend to what needs tending while letting everything else grow as it will. This is not giving up. This is growing up, recognizing that you are not the author of the universe, that you are part of a vast unfolding that doesn't require your constant management, that life knows how to be life without your interference. Here's a practice. Notice one area of your life where you've been gardening in the old way, fighting against natural growth, insisting on your vision, exhausting yourself with control. Ask yourself, what would happen if I let this grow as it wants to grow? Not abandoned it, not became negligent, but simply stopped fighting it. Maybe it's a relationship that isn't matching your image of what it should be. Maybe it's your body growing older despite your resistance. Maybe it's your career taking unexpected turns. See if you can shift from sculptor to collaborator, from controller to witness, from fighting to flowing. Breathe now and feel how your breath grows without your control. Your lungs expand because they want to expand, because that's what lungs do, not because you have designed the perfect breath. Let the rest of your life be like your breath, cared for but not controlled, intended but not forced, growing as it grows, becoming what it becomes. As we prepare to bring our journey to its close, let us reflect on one more teaching about the nature of endings and beginnings, the river that found the sea. In the highlands of Tibet, where glaciers crept down ancient mountains and the air was so thin that every breath felt like a gift, there began a river. It started as nothing more than a trickle of meltwater seeping from ice that was older than human memory. This trickle, gathered with other trickles, became a stream, then a river, and began its long journey toward the distant sea. The river in its youth was impatient. It rushed over rocks, carved through valleys, and hurled itself down waterfalls with the urgency of something that had somewhere important to be. It was proud of its speed, its power, its sense of purpose. It knew where it was going, to the sea, to completion, to the end of its journey. And it wanted to get there as quickly as possible. As it flowed through the plains, the river began to slow. The land was flat, and no matter how hard it pushed, it could not maintain its mountain speed. It grew frustrated. It felt like it was failing, losing its purpose, becoming lazy and stagnant. It tried to remember its waterfall days, its canyon carving days, and felt only loss. But something else was happening. In its slowness, the river began to notice things it had never noticed before. It saw the kingfisher diving for fish, the water lilies opening at dawn, the children playing on its banks. It felt the sun warming its surface and the cool mud embracing its depths. It noticed how it gave life to everything it touched, the farms that drank from it, the villages that gathered around it, the countless creatures that called it home. The river realized it had been so focused on reaching the sea that it had missed the journey. It had been so obsessed with completion that it had failed to be present for life itself. And now, in its slowness, it discovered that the journey was not a means to an end. The journey was the end. Every moment of flowing, fast or slow, mountain or plain, was the purpose. The sea was not a destination to be reached. The sea was what the river already was, water, simply water, flowing as water flows. When the river finally reached the sea, something unexpected happened. It didn't feel like an ending at all. There was no moment when the river stopped being river and started being sea. There was only a gradual widening, a gentle dissolving, a seamless transition from one form of water to another form of water. The river's journey didn't end at the sea. It continued in the sea, in the clouds that formed from evaporation, in the rain that fell on distant mountains, in new rivers that began where this one had begun. The river had always been the sea. The sea had always been the river. The distinction between them was useful for navigation, but ultimately illusory. Water was water, and water moved through all forms, never arriving anywhere because it was always everywhere, never ending because it was always beginning. The Buddha taught, "No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. We ourselves must walk the path." But he also taught about the interconnectedness of all things, the way everything flows into everything else, the way boundaries are conventions rather than realities. You are not separate from the ocean of existence. You are the ocean, temporarily taking the form of a wave, imagining yourself separate, rushing toward a completion that was never necessary because you were never incomplete. Consider your own journey, friend. How much of it has been spent rushing toward goals, toward achievements, toward some imagined destination where everything will finally be complete? And how much of the journey itself have you missed while focused on arrival? The job you wanted led to another job you wanted. The relationship you sought led to new relationships to seek. The milestone you reached revealed only more milestones ahead. The horizon recedes as you approach it because that is the nature of horizons. This is not a counsel of despair. It is an invitation to presence. The river doesn't stop flowing when it realizes the sea is not a destination. It flows more fully, more joyfully, more awake. It stops missing its own life in the rush toward a future that never comes as expected. It discovers that flowing is enough, that being a river is enough, that the journey is not preparation for life, but life itself. You are already home, not because you've arrived somewhere, but because you were never separate from where you've always been. The seeking is part of the journey, but the finding was never somewhere else. You are the river and the sea and the cloud and the rain. You are the beginning and the ending and everything between. You are already what you seek, and the recognition of this is not the end of growth, but the beginning of real growth. Growth that isn't driven by lack, but flows naturally from fullness. Here is a practice. Think of something you're rushing toward, a goal, a milestone, a future state you believe will complete you. Now ask yourself, what would it mean to be fully present in my journey toward this goal, rather than sacrificing the present for the future? How can I honor both the direction I'm moving and the ground I'm standing on? The river flows toward the sea, yes, but it also flows right here, right now, fully present in this curve of its banks, this temperature of its water, this moment of its eternal journey. Breathe now and feel yourself as flowing water. You are moving, yes, always moving, always changing, always becoming. But you are also here, completely here, as present as water can be in any moment of its endless journey. Let the rushing ease, let the urgency soften. Let yourself be the river that knows the sea is not somewhere else, that knows the journey is the destination, that knows every drop of water is already ocean, always has been, always will be. Our final teaching comes through the story of coming home. The journey that never was. There was once a seeker. Let us call them by your name, friend, because this story is about you, who spent many years searching for enlightenment. This seeker read every book, attended every teaching, practiced every technique. They studied with masters, went on retreats, learned meditation and mindfulness and loving kindness and inquiry. They accumulated wisdom like treasures, filled notebooks with insights, had profound experiences of peace and clarity and connection. But something always felt incomplete. Each insight led to questions. Each experience faded. Each teaching pointed beyond itself to something more, something not yet grasped. The seeker became skilled in spiritual practice, could speak eloquently about presence and awareness and non-attachment, could guide others in meditation. But deep down, there remained a sense of something missing, some final understanding that would make everything complete. One evening, exhausted from years of seeking, the seeker sat in quiet despair. I've done everything, they thought. I've tried so hard, studied so much, practiced so diligently. But I'm no closer to enlightenment than when I started. Maybe I'm simply incapable. Maybe I lack whatever is needed. Maybe I'm doomed to always seek and never find. In that moment of complete giving up, something shifted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no flash of light, no sudden understanding, no cosmic experience. Just a simple recognition, quiet as dawn. I am looking for what is already here. The seeker sat very still, almost afraid to move as this truth settled. All the peace they'd been seeking was already present in the simple act of sitting. All the love they'd been trying to cultivate was already here in the care they'd shown themselves by seeking in the first place. All the presence they'd been practicing was already the ground of every moment. They weren't moving towards something. They were it. Had always been it, could never not be it. But wait, the mind protested. This can't be it. It's too simple, too ordinary, too already here. Enlightenment is supposed to be special, transformative, different from this. And with that thought, the recognition began to fade. The seeking mind reasserted itself. I must have been mistaken. Real enlightenment would be more profound than this. I need to keep looking. But in the space before the mind fully reclaimed the moment, there was a faint smile. Because even if the recognition faded, even if the seeking resumed, something had been seen that couldn't be completely unseen. The thing being sought was not absent, just overlooked. Like looking everywhere for glasses that are on top of your head. Like searching for your face in a mirror, not realizing you are the face. The seeker continued their practice, but something was different now. The desperate quality was gone. Sometimes they would remember the recognition, and in remembering it would be here again. Not as something gained, but as something that had never left. The peace they sought wasn't at the end of a long path. It was the ground they'd been walking on the whole time. Enlightenment wasn't a special state to achieve. It was the simple, obvious truth of being, always available, never absent, just waiting to be noticed. Years later, someone asked this person, "Did you ever find what you were looking for?" They smiled and said, "No. I looked everywhere and never found it. But I stopped looking and discovered I'd never lost it." The Buddha's final words were, "All composite things are subject to decay. Strive with diligence." But he also taught, this very body, just as it is the enlightened Buddha. And perhaps most beautifully, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. Dear friend, you who have listened to these stories through this long night, you who have traveled with me through temples and gardens and rivers and mountains, you who seek peace, it's here, not at the end of the journey, not after you've practiced enough or understood enough or become enough. Here, now, in the simple fact of awareness experiencing this moment. You are not broken and needing to be fixed. You are not incomplete and needing to become whole. You are not lost and needing to find your way. You are already home. You've always been home. The seeking itself was the only thing creating the sense of being lost. This doesn't mean you stop growing, stop learning, stop practicing. The flower doesn't stop being a flower when it stops seeking to be a flower. It simply flowers naturally as its nature. You can practice, study, grow, not to become what you're not, but to express more fully what you already are. All these teachings you've heard tonight about emptiness and fullness, about letting go and being present, about compassion and acceptance, they're not instructions for becoming enlightened. They're descriptions of what's already true, invitations to notice what has always been here. Like someone describing the sun to you while you stand in broad daylight. The description doesn't create the sun. It just helps you notice what was shining on you all along. So rest now, dear one. Rest in the understanding that you need do nothing, fix nothing, achieve nothing. You can practice if you wish, study if you wish, seek if you wish, but know that what you seek is here in the seeking, present in the practice, available in every moment. You are the peace you seek. You are the love you seek. You are the awareness, the presence, the wholeness you've been looking for everywhere else. Let your body settle completely now. Feel how every part of you can relax, can release, can let go. The day is done. The seeking can rest. The mind can quiet. You are safe. You are held. You are home. Whatever dreams come, whatever tomorrow brings. Right now, you are exactly where you need to be. Exactly who you need to be. May you sleep deeply, peacefully, held in the vast compassion that includes all beings. May you wake rested and renewed. May you carry with you the seed of remembering that you are already whole. May you be happy. May you be peaceful. May you be free. Good night, dear friend. Rest well.